With no comments, may I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
A motion, may I have a second? Second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you, motion carries. Our first, both sets. That's approval for both sets. First applicant tonight is SD 2012-D05, a final for Luthra 4 LLC to construct an enclosure at the existing stairway for an ADA-compliant elevator and expand the second floor area over existing first floor. Stormwater management facilities to be constructed at 115 Stratford Avenue, Wayne. Is the applicant here? Thank you. You want to come forward, Nick, with the application? Can you give us a, I think it's the first time we've seen this, so give us
It is.
Good. So give us a quick overview of what we're doing in general, and then we'll go back to David for his comments and back to you for
Sure.
comments on his comments. Thank you.
This is the old Stratford Villa restaurant that you may recall on Stratford Avenue. Across the street is the farmers market strip mall type place. Then also across the street is a large office complex, and then next to it is a large office complex as well. And then as you see on the plan, and I don't know if we... You see here, okay, here's the existing building. And as I mentioned, over in this area is where the farmers market strip stores are. In this area are two large office buildings with parking, and adjacent here are two large office buildings with parking. And then over here is Farm Road in this area here. Farm Road's residential. The only residential site is here on, I guess that would be the eastern portion of the site. Over here is on the corner of Stratford and Lancaster. Okay. On the corner of Stratford and Lancaster is Enterprise Leasing. The proposal is, as you notice, is kind of an old Victorian, I guess, type home that was built around the turn of the century. I think it was like 1908 is what the records indicated. Back in 1965, a variance was granted to operate a restaurant out there, and it was the old San Francisco. You may be dating myself a little bit, but Gino Marchetti owned it at that time. Yeah. And it then changed. Chef Tell went in there, and it's been under different ownership, most recently from a restaurant standpoint by Alberto. Alberto sold the premises in 2004 to a person who was going to put a day spa in. That never went through. She did come before the boards to get permission to put a much larger addition onto the building, which was granted, as well as expand the parking. But again, that was never done. Alberto came in, took repossession of the property, went before the zoning board again. Zoning board determined that he may continue the restaurant use since it was granted by variance. Mr. Luthra, since that point, went before the zoning board because he was putting an addition on, so it's an expansion of the nonconformity, so he got variances as well to expand the nonconformity. The addition is this area here is already over impervious coverage. As you notice, we're actually decreasing impervious coverage on this plan. But this addition here is for handicap accessibility to the second floor and elevator. This addition here, again, is a second floor addition, so we're not increasing any impervious, to enlarge an area for a larger room for weddings, parties, things of that nature.
That's over an existing first floor.
Yes, it's an existing, and basically he's putting the addition on the second floor. It's over the first floor is where it would be going, this addition here. The prior zoning relief to both Alberto and to Mr. Luthra require the removal of 6 parking spaces and turning it to green. So in this area here, you see this is now green. I believe there was 2 spaces there. I believe there was 2 spaces here, and there were 2 spaces here. And so they were turned to green. You may recall there was an issue regarding taking down trees. If you read the newspapers, you saw that. Even though Mr. Luthra is not increasing impervious, he's putting a large stormwater detention basin in to control stormwater, as well as planting a row of trees that has been approved by the by the Shade Tree Commission. But in effect, we're putting 2 basins in to control stormwater because one of the neighbors' concerns was the flow of stormwater down onto Farm Lane. So as part of this process and this application, you see the basins on the property. Probably the only issue, and David can get into it, regarding is that they're asking us to reduce the number of parking spaces. By reducing the number of parking spaces, we're reducing the seating in the restaurant. So I think that's probably the main point, through all this.
Dave?
Yes. This application was submitted basically 2 months ago. So we had seen it and we have reviewed it. Our review letter went out to the applicant. The applicant decided rather than come before you last month, they wanted to revise their plans to address our comments. They resubmitted, issued a response letter basically indicating they were willing to comply with most of our comments. However, they did not revise the plans as yet. So while I could go through comment by comment, it's probably not necessary. What I did was I highlighted a couple bullet points on page 2 of my letter, and as Nick indicated, they deal with the parking. The existing parking lot is not, it does not comply with our current saldo ordinances for parking lots with regard to space size. Some spaces are as short as 15 to 16 feet. Some are a little narrow. The drive aisles, again, are as narrow as maybe 12 to 13 feet when they're required to be 22 feet. So there's deficiencies on the existing layout of the parking lot. So we're asking them to bring the parking lot into compliance with our current saldo. The other issue has to do with the number of spaces required for employees. The applicant indicates that there will be 10 employees on the largest shift. To us, that seemed a little low. There's nothing in the Radnor zoning which dictates how many employee spaces need to be provided. So we deferred to the ITE, the traffic manual, and how they look at restaurants. And the numbers they use is, for a restaurant of this type, you should expect 4.2 employees per 1,000 square feet of restaurant space. So based on the architecturals we were provided, that would translate into about 18 spaces required, or 18 employees, and with the Radnor requirements of 1 space per 2 employees, they would need to devote 9 spaces to employees, which would reduce their parking left for patrons. So those are the key issues. The other issues are issues which are just cosmetic and just getting the plans cleared up, but those 2 issues are what's really driving the application.
So just so we're clear, it's not building size, it's how they're using the building. The parking relationship, not to the building size, to the use of the building.
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
that's how the parking is calculated based on the use of the building. Exactly. Yes.
Now, the number of anticipated employees is going to be based on the number of square feet of the building. If he adds the second floor, that's going to increase the number of employees. Is that right?
Well, but we took that into account. We took into account the total square footage based on the architecturals, the total square footage of. I'm sorry?
Of the finished product.
Correct. Yes. So that's what we based our number on. Exactly.
Nick,
Yeah,
you want to
I would
comment?
agree David accurately represents what the issues are. Just to go back a little bit, this parking lot has existed since 1964. Basically, nothing has been done differently to it since it operated as a restaurant from 1964 to 2004 for 40 years. In Radnor, parking is based on the number of seats that you have and not on square footage. So that's where really the ITE fails, because the ITE is basing it on square footage and not on the number of seats. So we have calculated the parking based on the number of seats that are being proposed here. Now, granted, he is building an addition that would be a large party room, but still, he is still limited to the number of seats which I believe is 183 seats according to the plan, he still would be limited to that. Prior to this restaurant had 225 seats. There's actually applications that they made to the township, and the township approved 225 seats for this restaurant. So all we're saying is basically that we have an existing nonconformity that has existed for over 40 years, and that we're not doing anything different. We are compliant with the number of seats based on the number of parking spaces that we have, and that the ITE is not really applicable here because the Radnor code is based on seats and not on square footage.
Actually, Nick, the ordinance requires parking in a two-stepped process for restaurants, number of seats and number of
that's
employees.
correct. That's
So
correct.
where the ITE is
Yes.
coming in and is applicable to this provision is based off of the number of employees.
But the ITE, when it talks about number of employees, bases it on square footage. And in fact, there's nothing in the Radnor Township zoning code that says it is to be based on the ITE. And throughout the years, as this board's well aware, it's always been based on the number of employees that the applicant contends that he has. And if he's wrong, then obviously he's issued a citation by the township if they go in and see he has more employees and not enough parking, or he has too many seats. This is the first time I ever saw the ITE generation, and I understand the code's deficient. There's no, basically it says based on number of employees, but gives you no definition on how to arrive at that number of employees.
I don't think the code is deficient. I think we wouldn't be questioning this if the number of employees that were being proposed was a reasonable amount. And when we compare that to what the ITE would require, and you're almost at 50% reduction, that's where the question came into play. That's what we're questioning, the number of employees, and we do not believe 10 is a fair number of employees for a restaurant of this size.
Based on square footage or based on seating? Because I don't think the ITE, and Dave, I don't know, does the ITE even mention employees per seats, or does it go by square footage?
It mentions employees per square foot
Right.
of lot area. But like Kevin's saying, I mean, just anecdotally, it just seems like 10 employees is not enough to service a facility of this size. And I mean, because there's nothing that specifically in the Radnor code gives us direction, we're looking elsewhere to have something with some other guidance.
How are event seats treated in this calculation? In other words, for the event space upstairs, you're still limited to 183
Still
total
limited to 183.
for the entire
Or whatever it is, yes.
entire space.
Entire restaurant space would be limited to the number of seats.
So then if you have I don't know what the seating capacity upstairs is supposed to be, but,
Yeah. If he had a wedding that had 183 people upstairs, which I don't know if he can.
Right.
From a seating capacity, then he would have to close the rest of the restaurant.
well, that's what I was trying to get a sense of. And then I'm trying to imagine that if I have a cook down in the kitchen and, I think I'm finding myself falling in the way Dave and Kevin are, is the 10 employees, by the time you have cooks and busboys and, just person at the door, 7 people to wait staff 180 people doesn't really jive, and so that's the reason you went to other measures for what would be a reasonable number of employees. Is that what I'm hearing the two of you say?
Yes, that was my line of thinking, yes.
David, can you back up and explain to me why this, or how this was handled at zoning? They only looked at the building size, not the parking?
They just looked at the number of seats,
Oh,
basically.
well,
not the
we're going to
building
get
size.
into that a little later, because I actually have other questions about this
Okay.
plan, but there was something specific about the zoning I wanted to
Yeah, matter of
reference.
fact, zoning said you can have no more than 183 seats, I believe, which was based on the number of parking spaces. So they put a max number on it.
Question,
So-
at one time, it had 225 seats?
Yeah, we have applications that were made to the township that indicate number of seats. This was 1999, 2000. One said 210 to 225, that was 03. 01 said 225.
So he's going to have a larger number of square feet, ostensibly almost all in serving area, or, where places people can sit, and he's going to have a smaller number of seats available to him?
No, he would have, based on this, the prior, he would have less number. These applications show 225, and we're requesting 183 based on the number of parking spaces.
Right, but he's going to have what you're telling me is the building is currently configured. If we use the old stuff, we could have 225 people in it. Or
From a configuration standpoint, he couldn't have it because of the number of parking spaces, but from a configuration standpoint, I don't know, but I assume they put in 225 seats somehow.
then I would expect, especially if you're adding square feet on the upper floor, maybe 1,000 square feet. I have no idea exactly how many it is, although I did read all this stuff. I just can't remember. There's going to be a tremendous temptation to exceed the 183 or 184 square feet, isn't there?
183 seats, if he did, obviously be in violation, he'd be getting cited.
And what kind of penalty would we be able to impose for violating that?
I'm sorry, Doug.
What kind of penalty would the township be
I
able to
believe it's
impose?
$1,000 a day for every day of violation.
Not $1,000 a
I'll turn to
person.
John, I think that's it.
Oh, yeah, but that's only after you file a citation and you go in front of District Justice Tootin and hope that he fines somebody that's violating your zoning ordinance $1,000 a day. Doesn't happen very often. It's not an easy process. It wouldn't happen. Plus, this is going to be a monitoring issue. How's the township going to know if they exceed 183 seats?
I do remember that this particular applicant did violate the shade tree ordinance rather substantially.
Well,
And it seems to
we
have
can have a
demonstrated.
discussion on that, Doug. I did bring that up, and part of that
My point is-
resolution is this large stormwater system, which
My
really
le-
they would not be required to do.
My particular level of confidence that he's going to comply with the 183 seat limit is pretty small, just on the basis of history with respect to this particular piece of property.
Remember, too, that the addition is partly for enlarged kitchen as well. It's not just merely floor space for seats. It's this area here is for handicap, and part of this area, I believe, is also for kitchen as well. Bathrooms.
David, in taking into account the driveway aisles and the plantings and everything else, is that what they're short, whatever this is, 12 seats? Or is 171 what they can put in with a redesigned plan, correcting all the driveway issues and parking issues, or bringing it into code?
I mean, we really don't know what they could put in without having the plan redesigned to have a compliant
Okay,
parking.
so this is only going to shrink for them.
Most likely, yes.
Yeah, okay.
They're going to lose parking spaces to make a compliant parking facility.
Ed, so are we just going to jump in? You want to go down the line, or are we going to, because I have a couple of more basic questions, not even the specifics of the parking. Well, one thing I do want to mark for the record, just so that there's not a confusion later down the line, is that the letter dated June 27th says that the Planning Commission reviewed this on June 4th, and we did not review it June 4th. The applicant removed it, and it was never on the agenda. So I just don't want anybody to be left with the impression that we've seen this before. This is our first review date.
Yeah, I gave
Staff saw it, but we
and I
did
gave the
not.
township an extension letter saying it doesn't start running until
Well-
this evening.
Right. And I'm just saying, from a review standpoint, I just want everybody to be clear, this is our first time seeing it. The other question that I have about the review letter is that the agenda says that it's a final plan. However, everything that's referenced in the letter from Gilmore references this as a preliminary plan. So I would like clarification on, was this submitted? Did someone have the expectation this was a final plan approval? Or what? Because everything in the letter suggests, and given the complexity of some of the questions, I would say this should be a preliminary land development application, not final plan.
That's your
So I would like clarification on
Okay,
that.
and I'll ask Dave, I'm not certain what the plan says, but a preliminary plan is based on the amount of disturbance that you would have. And since this is a small plan, that's why it can be a final plan. Now, I'm not certain how it's titled or,
Well, the way it's been determined in the past, you have to submit as a preliminary plan. You have the right to ask for a waiver to have it considered preliminary final, but by right, you don't have a right to have a preliminary final plan just on limited disturbance. You'd need a waiver to allow a preliminary final approval.
I'd have to look. That's, again, that
there's-
wasn't mine.
There's no disturbance cutoff for preliminary final. This is a preliminary plan.
Thank you. I would have read it that way, but I just wanted clarification, and I wanted it on the record because the agenda does say final. The other question I have, is there a reason these plans don't have a seal?
I mean, they're not required to have a seal at this point. I mean, prior to them being accepted and recorded by the township, they need a seal on them. But at this stage, especially at the preliminary level, a seal is not required.
Yeah, I've never personally seen one of our applications. I've never seen one of our plans without a seal. And maybe I missed it before, but again, because it was marked as final on the agenda, I was concerned that there was no seal. And then, I mean, you all made note of it, that there's many deficiencies on the plan in terms of some of our saldo requirements. I mean, they're not showing all of the adjacent neighbors and all the topography. I know that's been a shift in the plans. So that was,
And they're just design standards that typically
Right.
are resolved.
and it seemed as though there was somewhat of an issue with, down the road, we don't have to deal with it tonight, but the sidewalk issue on Stratford, that was another one that caught my eye, is because there's no sidewalk, and sidewalk would be required on Stratford Avenue. No, it's not.
I know
There's
Dave's
not-
comment said something.
Well, I mean, I guess I was a little confused because the plans actually propose sidewalk and curb along Stratford, but there's reference in the response letter that they might be seeking a waiver from it. So I'm not sure if they were willing to put the sidewalk and curb in or if they were looking for a waiver.
Right, that's the clarity I was looking for as well. And then the other question that I had is that in the, I'm just looking for the page, in the review letter that references the zoning hearing board decision, the wording of it says that the zoning hearing board, the relief that was granted was for a particular plan. And I know this is one of the tricky things when we have a land application that it needs to go for zoning relief, but should it go to zoning first? But then what if the plan changes and then zoning has approved that plan and then we see a different plan? We need clarification on, is the plan we're reviewing tonight that they are saying is the plan upon which they received relief, is that the plan or has it changed? And I just don't have, I'm not saying that it isn't, I just think that we should have verification of that. Is this the plan that the zoning hearing board saw when they granted the relief that they granted with, it was a use issue, right? Because the building had been empty for so long?
Now, really what happened is because this is because he's putting an addition onto the building, and it was a prior variance grant, he needed relief in order to put the addition onto the building.
That was
So
one
that's what
issue.
it really was. It wasn't, the use is allowed, it was more because he's putting an addition onto the building that is a non-conforming to some extent, whether it's non-conforming by prior use or by variance, he needed relief from the zoning board in order to put that addition on.
I thought there was an additional issue as to whether or not the non-conforming use had expired because the building's been empty for so long,
No,
but they were
because
granted that use?
It
Is
was
that-
granted by variance, so the non-conforming use is not really applicable here. It's because it's granted by variance, which just runs with the land.
Right, and then my final comment, which is, well, second to last, but I'm going to leave the parking one because I have read through the zoning hearing board decision and saw something in addition to what Mr. Coniglia saw. Is it okay that the stormwater management system is in the right-of-way of Windsor Avenue?
Windsor Avenue, and I'm sure the neighbors would agree to this, Windsor Avenue has never been open. All right, so no one wants Windsor Avenue going through there, at least of all the neighbors. And since it's never been open, basically, one side of it reverts back to the property owner on one side, and the other side reverts back to the property owner on Luther's side.
So does that need to be memorialized somewhere, that the right-of-way is being reverted back to property owner? How does that work? I mean, I read the long-ago zoning hearing board decision about Windsor Avenue not being opened, and it's not ever going to be opened, and I drove the property and tried to see as much as I could, and I can see why we would never open Windsor Avenue and why the neighbors would never want that. I appreciate all that. But the fact of the matter is, the plan is showing a right-of-way. Are we allowed to put a stormwater management system in a right-of-way? Because I don't want to approve a precedent.
Let me address that. And this is the first time I've heard this question come up, so it's probably going to require Mr. Cornelia to do a little bit of research. But I'm assuming this is a paper street. It's shown on an old subdivision plan, and there may be some private rights in it. There's no public rights in it since it was never dedicated. It was never officially opened, at least as far as I'm aware. So in terms of whether or not that can go in the right-of-way, it's not really a right-of-way unless it's been open. I don't know why it's shown on the plan as a right-of-way. The township doesn't have any rights in it. Township doesn't want any rights in it. Township doesn't want to open it. but there may be some private rights in it that somebody's going to need to, before a final plan approval, someone's going to need to do some research on.
And that's fine. I mean, as I said, for this particular plan, I don't think it has much. I'm more concerned about the precedent we might set.
Does it have to be vacated? You say the township has no rights?
If it's never been opened, it doesn't have to be vacated.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, there's no such thing as an abandoned road in Pennsylvania. It either gets opened somehow, court order, condemnation, deed of dedication, or not. But there's a lot of these paper streets all over the state that there's maybe private rights in it on the old subdivision plan. We've had about 4 or 5 of them in Radnor in the last couple of years that have come up. People want to build next to those paper streets, and where do you measure the setback from? That's come up a lot. But I mean, I haven't researched this. I haven't looked at the title. I have some questions for Mr. Cornelia, but before it goes to final, I think we need to clear that up.
And then this is the last one, guys, I promise. I read the zoning hearing board decision of May of this year that granted him the ability to add on to the addition, and basically that's the one. And I'm looking at I don't see anything referenced about parking. So it's other parts of the zoning code that he had the appeal in and that he was given relief. And it specifically says that the restaurant shall have no more than 183 seats. I agree with that. Doesn't mean it can't have fewer. But what it does say is that the applicant shall conform to all zoning code parking requirements, including all parking requirements pertaining to a restaurant use, and that the order says relief is only granted with respect to the zoning code sections enumerated above, and no relief is granted with respect to any other provision of the zoning code, including those provisions pertaining to on-site parking. Other than specific provisions of the zoning code as enumerated above, nothing in this decision shall create or imply any approval under township ordinances and any approval under the township saldo. So what that says to me is all the talk about grandfathered parking spaces and old requirements and, I mean, they attached all of the old decisions, so you can read the timeline going back to 1964. But at the end of the day, this applicant agreed in May of this year to abide by all of our parking requirements with respect to a restaurant use.
No, that's not entirely accurate, Susan, because you're kind of putting language into it.
That's my understanding.
We did not agree to comply with the current saldo because it is our opinion that this has existed since 1964, and therefore we do not have to update it under the current saldo.
Can I chime in here? Because we're going to have a disagreement about this. And I know Peter and Dave and Kevin have been talking about it this week. But basically, the staff's position and our legal position is going to be, when you get a use variance, that doesn't create a non-conforming use. A use variance doesn't create any nonconformities. It's a use variance. It's not a non-conforming use. So to the extent that the parking lot's been there a long time, there's no nonconformities. As soon as they decide to file a land development plan, they've got to meet your requirements. So we can talk about it and debate it, but that's going to be our view going forward. So they got to make a decision as to number of seats, how do they meet the first paragraph of Dave's letter in terms of all those requirements. And the issue of employees, I guess, is Dave looked at something outside of the ordinance, and I think, and Susan has said this, that we think the number of employees proposed is being lowballed by this applicant. So that's got to be resolved somehow. It's certainly not 10. It may be 18. It may be more than 18. But we've got to use something other than something objective, which is the ITE standard, which is what Dave used. So, Nick, if you want to debate it some more, we can debate it some more. But you don't get a non-conforming parking lot because of a use variance. It's a use variance. It's not a creation of a nonconforming use.
And John, the only other part of that is this plan has been before this board previously, not you people, but the planning commission before, and the board of commissioners regarding this parking outlay, and it has been approved previously also in the existing condition.
Well, we agree, but this is a new land development. As soon as Mr. Luther decided to put a second story on this, to put a banquet room there, that created all kinds of compliance issues with the current saldo. So that's, and I think Kevin would agree, and I know Dave agrees, because we've been talking about it over the last week, and the applicant's got to decide how they want to proceed going forward.
I suggest that perhaps, I haven't spoken to Mr. Luther about this, but we have an opportunity to look at what we can do as a matter of right in the parking lot. And perhaps then we can come back to you and see where that leaves us.
Nick, just two questions to clarify for everyone. Can you show us on the print where the zoning is between the R4 and the CO, number one? And number two, how much difference size-wise are these additions? What's the net additional square footage that we're talking about?
Here's the R4 and the CO line here. You'll notice the CO line basically runs up Lancaster Avenue, and it comes partly into where we're located, right here. And then the R4 is the rest of it.
The rest of it, okay.
Okay, the addition is, I'll ask, perhaps Victor, you know the size of the addition for the elevator, and then the size of the second floor addition. Do you know that off?
Maybe we can go to the architectural section.
Yeah, it talks about, well, actually, it could go building coverage, may show it at least on the other building coverage here, because there's an increase in building coverage just because of the elevator, the stair elevator.
Yes, the building coverage is only increased by the stair, the hallway, and elevator.
Right, and that's already impervious.
Nick,
you want to use
the
that mic so
microphone.
they can hear you?
Yeah,
Sorry.
That's already impervious, but do you have in your calculations on how much additional building coverage it is? Because that'll at least tell us how large the stairway and elevator is. Existing, more? Okay, here it is. Thank you. 350 square feet. And proposed second floor infill for 1,450.
What's the square footage of the building as it exists? Or does it, or am I asking a question that's on the plan?
Yeah, well, the building existing is 3,878 square feet.
One floor, right?
One floor, yeah, that's just the footprint. Oh, and in the CO, excuse me, yes, it's 1,190.
It's the 5068, the top number.
Correct, 5068.
Gotcha. Thank you, Nick.
By the way, why is it that the zoning data doesn't match? At the top of the zoning data, it says, and I have to look at my big plan, hang on. 53.6 for impervious. Nick, go down about 4 numbers, right there. But when you go down to lot data, down.
It could be, well, one's 53.6, remember, one's 22.8.
For impervious, now keep going
yeah.
down. Keep going down, down.
Yep,
To
that's what,
existing impervious, keep going down.
49, oh.
No, the very bottom number.
51.8. Oh, that's in the R4, and then the CO, 22.8.
Oh, you have to add those together again.
53.6. Yeah, I see what you're saying. It says provided 53.6 impervious up top
Right.
on the R4, and then it says 51.8.
What I was trying to understand is the top number assuming the addition? It doesn't say it as proposed. It doesn't say, well, maybe it does. Oh, yeah, no,
It
the
says-
proposed, it'll go from 51 to 53, is
53.
that what they're saying?
I thought it was being reduced. No, it's being
Yeah,
reduced.
I mean, our understanding was the
Yeah.
53.8 is not correct. It should be 51.8 in that top table. That's the correct number.
Yeah, but the impervious was going down even under this plan because we were taking out the areas the zoning board requested that we take out.
And John, one more question. If the applicant wanted to go with the 183 employees or seats, as we were calling it before, is that a waiver from us, or is that back to zoning? Who makes that decision?
I think the issue that Dave raised in his letter, I mean, there's deficiencies there that he calls out, parking lot width, et cetera, and things like that, that's something that's waivable. In terms of the, I guess in terms of the numbers, I'm not sure whether he'd have to go back to zoning or not if he wants to maintain the same seat. He probably would have to do that. You have 66 parking spaces now, I believe, shown on this plan. So, and I don't know the answer to this, I'll ask Dave, but if he complied with the saldo provisions, do we know how many parking spaces he could actually put on the site?
No, I mean, we didn't take the step to do any kind of sketch showing what a compliant parking lot would look like, but intuitively, they're going to lose some spaces, so.
Yeah, we would have to look at that, and that's what I had mentioned. You know, it's something we should look at and see what we can do for if it was a totally compliant parking lot.
If you could only put 60, then you'd have to reduce the number of seats, I suppose, to,
You know, or we see what a compliant parking lot is, and perhaps we ask for a waiver, because they can grant waivers on aisle widths, not on aisle widths, yes, not on parking size,
right, on the dimensional criteria that's in saldo, but,
which is aisle width.
right.
Yeah.
Parking space dimensions, aisle width, et cetera.
I have one additional question. You know, the Delaware County letter talks about the historical aspect of the property, and I don't see any reference to HARB being involved in this.
I don't, it's not in the historic district, so I don't think HARB, there's no requirement for HARB, but obviously they're going to, you know, they could address it, if you like, as to the architectural.
Yeah, the
Why don't you
architects.
identify yourself
Oh,
first?
I'm sorry. I am Victor DiPaolo, planner and landscape architect for the project. And the architects, Harmon Deutsch, have elevations in here that show no modifications of significance to the architectural details on the structure itself. So they are going to respect its architectural character.
So we have plenty of time on this applicant,
Yeah,
right?
that's why I was going to suggest if you table it to next month, and we'll come back and
Why
see
don't we
what
go
we
to
can do.
public comment
Sure.
first, and then we'll go with that. Public comment?
Nick, we're going to need an extension, too.
You have, tonight was the first night. I gave you an extension letter, so we would have 90 days from tonight, I think.
Well, I'm looking at Dave's letter. It says August 5th, 2012, so.
No, I gave an extension letter saying that it would, no, it would start running from this evening. See if I can find it. I'll show it to you. I have it.
Yeah, let's, instead of running from a certain date, let's just pick a date and say it's extended to
Yeah, because I said it,
October 1st
that's what I
or
had said.
November
Yeah.
1st.
It was from tonight, 90 days from this evening, which should be October 2nd.
Okay, okay.
Public comment. Come right forward. Give us your name.
Good evening. My name is Kimberly Donchez. I live at 327 Windsor Avenue. And you can kind of see where my house would be located right up here at the top of the property. And I have a couple questions and many, many concerns. One question would be, what is the height of the trees that are proposed to be planted, the new bank of trees along here?
I know actually, when we were before Shade Tree, that Shade Tree initially did not like the height of the trees and asked us to increase them, which we agreed to. But I'm not certain what
Do we
that height
know?
is. Yeah.
Yes. The original plan that went in front of the Shade Tree Commission showed evergreen trees that were 6 to 8 feet high. They asked us to increase the height, and we did that of 9 to 10 feet.
So while you're still here, can I ask? I'm assuming if this is parking, that there will have to be tall lighting that is going to shine down onto the parking lot to illuminate it. And I'm wondering, from my vantage point, I have this beautiful view of the restaurant now that they took all the trees out. And I just love it so much, and I just can't wait for more lights to happen. But I'm wondering, what can you do to help me if those trees are not high, and they're certainly not within my view shed?
Apparently,
There's no lights being proposed. And matter of fact, Shade Tree's concern was more headlights, and that's what they were considering blocking.
So there's no light?
No lighting.
Anywhere in the...
there, if I could correct it, there is lighting that exists on the site. There is no additional lighting being proposed. The lighting standards are identified by this symbol, and you can see 1, 2, 3. And I believe there's one other over here, but none of the lighting is proposed to the rear of the parking lot. So there's no new lighting being proposed.
Okay. Second question would be, and I don't know if this is a zoning issue or not, we have an enormous problem on our street with noise. I've lived there longer than I care to admit, and before the giant car wash went in, we didn't have a problem. Before the air conditioning units get put on the top of buildings, we don't have a problem. The noise from Lancaster, we all knew it was there when we bought the houses. That's not a problem. But the constant encroachment of business on our perfect little pocket of a neighborhood has been really, really strong of late. And I am very concerned about fan noise. I don't know if the elevator will be, if there's any kind of outdoor stuff. We get dumpsters. We hear them at 7 a.m., 6 a.m. on Saturday mornings from the other areas. And I know that's not necessarily your problem, but as you're thinking about this location, consider the neighbors when you think about issues like that, because business is just slowly pushing its way into where we are. And I think we're at a tipping point where we need to make a decision collectively as a group where we're going to allow that to stop. And noise is a huge problem, and one that people don't think about as they're putting something like this in. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
I'm Melanie Shane, and I live at 401 Windsor. I will admit how long I've lived on the street. I've lived there 32 years. And seen a lot of change during those 32 years, not all of it negative. But the neighborhood is very, very fragile. We're continuing to see commercial establishments encroach through parking, through people cutting through the neighborhood to avoid the stoplight at Wawa, people parking on the street that are dining at Wawa at noon. There are a lot of children in the neighborhood. Over 20, and people are speeding through there. In regard to the property next door, we, a number of years ago, had an agreement with the owner at that point, and a lovely row of trees was planted to cut out the noise and the light. Of course, those are gone today, and as Kim mentioned, she can clearly see the building. I'm concerned about the addition of cars being in the neighborhood at night, the lights that are going to be shining into the bedrooms. All of the bedrooms in the neighborhood face that side on Farm and Windsor. By some it's known as Windsor Lane. I'm concerned about the lack of parking spaces. If a handicapped accessibility is added, then obviously there are going to have to be larger parking spaces added, and that's going to result in fewer parking spaces. And where are they going to spill over to? They're going to spill over into our neighborhood. They might spill over into the Stratford office buildings, which will even create a bigger problem with light at night. So I ask that these things be taken into consideration and not let this become another assault on our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? back to the applicant, Nick. Oh, Nick, we're going to make you sit down one more time. One more.
Okay.
I'm going to go one more. Sorry about that.
Sorry, this is my first time up here. My name's Darla DeMauro, and I'm at 307 Windsor Avenue, my husband and I, my 2 children. And so we have some of the youngest children in the block, Windsor Farm. And I have 3 concerns. First of all, I want to say that my husband and I purchased the house 4 years ago, and we absolutely adore the fact that we have walking access to so many restaurants in the area. So please, I want to start out by saying that we would just welcome another well-run establishment in the neighborhood, and we recognize the quality of the establishments that are literally within walking distance. But I do have 3 concerns, and I appreciate you guys taking the time to allow the neighbors to voice their concerns. My first is water, and while I'm not anywhere close to an engineer, and I do see that the water basins have been proposed, I will just share with you anecdotally that my family took refuge in our unfinished 100-year-old basement last year during the, what are we calling it, the hurricane tornado, whatever it was. It was frightening. And only by the grace of God, we didn't lose power and didn't see our basement flood. However, we do have water in our basement, as I know many of our street residents do. So I would really encourage you to do everything that you can to secure the properties on the street. And I know that's being looked at throughout the township, but it's certainly an issue for us. The second point that I would raise is the safety of our children. As Melanie pointed out, the fact that we have Wawa on one corner causes a lot of cut-through traffic, and we already know that it's a very small lane. And very often I see traffic get stuck and large trucks have to back up. So I would just encourage us to look at the safety of the children. And that brings me to the third point, which is that while I would really love to see another quality restaurant nearby, I am concerned about the fact that this is going to be a banquet facility, which will bring variable traffic. And as we all know, when somebody's rushing to an event, and there's a timing issue, people get short tempers. If they can't find a parking spot, they grab the nearest one. And we might see spillover onto our street. We might not. There's certainly other parking available in the shopping centers and the businesses and the offices nearby. However, that is an ongoing concern that the Windsor Farm residents have brought to you, and the variability of that consumer base that's going to be coming to the new restaurant is in fact a concern for me. Those are my issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, last call for public comment. Thank you. Nick, back to you.
Yeah, my suggestion is, as I mentioned previously, that perhaps we table it, have the applicant come back with a, see what he can do by right in the parking lot if we did comply with all the township requirements, or in the alternative, ask for some waivers from some of them. A couple comments as to water. Currently, there's no stormwater management at all on this site. We're actually proposing stormwater management in addition to decreasing the amount of the impervious coverage, so it only has to make the condition better than what currently exists. And there's no access to Farm Road from this site. The access is by Stratford Avenue and the buildings, as people have mentioned, the commercial buildings, as people have mentioned as well. So we think we've provided, and with some of the neighbors' concerns, that they've been addressed and been compensated for.
Thank you. So the application has been tabled. An extension to October 2nd, 12, correct? That's correct. Thank you. Okay, our next application is SD 2012-D06, a sketch plan of St. David's Radnor Episcopal Church to request a waiver from the land development to construct an addition with a renovation project which will increase impervious by 850 square feet at 763 South Valley Forge Road, Wayne. Applicant is present. Please come forward and get set up.
Thank you. While we're getting our materials together, I'm Frank Allen. I'm the rector of St. David's, a pastor. I've been there for 15 years, and over the last 10 years, we've been working a master plan to modernize facilities that begin with the old church, which was built in 1715, which we restored, built a new sanctuary, and as we're working through the master plan and that interesting thing we call fundraising, we've now turned to the Sunday school classrooms and our meeting space. We've got a very active church, not only for Christian mission, but also community mission with 5 AA meetings, Overeaters Anonymous, Al-Anon, and various community groups that come into St. David's. And so we're developing the next phase of the plan to accommodate an office staff, which most of them are living in closets and hallways, and also to upgrade the classrooms and the meeting space for the ongoing ministries and activities of St. David's. So if it's okay, I'm going to turn it over to our architect, Claire Donato, who's with Mark Thompson Associates.
Thank you. Just explain the sketch plan a little bit that you have received as part of the application, and this is an application for a waiver request from the land development process. The buildings shown and shaded in blue are the existing building areas. The area outlined in red is a prior zoning approval relief that was granted during the 2005-2006 expansion. The project that was constructed at that time was this chapel building, and as Reverend Allen has explained, there was part of the project, of course, was to serve the mission of the worship space, which the chapel accomplished, but what was left undone at the time were some of the professional spaces and the support areas that are critical to the activities of the church community. So there are 3 areas of expansion that are proposed. The area that's hatched at the center of the plan is a second-story addition that's proposed completely within the existing building footprint, except for an 150 square foot overhang on the second floor, and that area will serve the clergy staff in a more professional setting, for more confidential meetings, and for the activities that the clergy undertakes on a daily basis, day in, day out, to support the community. That is the hatched area. Again, that's other than 150 square feet, completely within the existing footprint. The area along the west wall is a corridor that was originally proposed as part of the chapel project and was not able to be funded at the time. That area and the orange shaded location on the north side of the building are improvements that are very important to the operations of how the building functions. Right now, when you arrive, whether you're a parishioner or visitor, it's very difficult to navigate through the building. It's quite labyrinthian and not easy to find your destination. And the purpose of the addition on the north is to create a new entry that would serve the building mostly for non-worship days on a 9 to 5 basis, so that if you're arriving, there's a clear new entry that then organizes the interior floor plan and creates much more legible access for a visitor coming to the building of where they're going to be headed. The area along the west wall, again, for operations, allows communication and connection through this very long building plan, and allows movement through the building so that the fellowship hall on the first floor will not get interrupted during performances or meetings or other events that are ongoing in fellowship hall. The net additional area with the new additions is about 1,360 square feet. However, this addition on the north is completely over already existing impervious coverage. So the area of the corridor addition is about 850 square feet. If you'd like, we can explain the floor plans and the elevations a little bit more, and we also have our a civil engineer available to discuss any issues with the stormwater management.
So the 850 in the front is a two-story piece?
Yes.
The 350 to the left is a two-story piece also, or
It's just
not?
one story. It's a porch. It's just a porch roof with a vestibule, creating an entry to the reception space.
And the hatched is a addition to the second floor only?
Correct.
Just so we're all clear on that. How does it affect parking, and is there any additional parking proposed with this or not?
This is to completely serve existing populations, existing staff. There's no increase proposed for capacity of the staff or the congregation through these additions. So there's no changes to parking proposed.
The porch
Other
addition,
questions?
the porch addition is over just what's currently a concrete slab, is that right?
Asphalt, yes.
All right. But unimpervious.
Kevin and John, this is a question for you. It's actually not about this plan per se. Technically, is this submitted as a sketch, but we don't usually take a vote on a sketch, but it's a sketch alongside a waiver? From an MPC standpoint, what is the technical name for this?
It's a sketch.
It's a sketch.
It's a sketch because what the church is asking is basically that they be permitted to proceed with just permits without filing a full-blown land development plan and going through that process.
Okay.
So, under Saldo 25511, you get to make a recommendation on that to the Board of Commissioners, and then you make your recommendation, and then it'll come up to them, and then they'll decide whether or not the scope of this project warrants a waiver of a land development filing.
So and again, not about this applicant, because this is, even I've done the math. It's, in terms of the 850 that they're actually adding, it's 0.03% in impervious. This is not a big deal. And I'm usually really tough on impervious, just so you know. But from a procedural standpoint, do neighbors get notified that this was submitted? Because there's a couple of neighbors in the back, and I know they're not marked on this map who the owners are. And
Sue's telling me that, yes, neighbors got
okay,
noticed.
so neighbors went. So we followed that that part of the procedure, and but we wouldn't normally take any kind of a vote on a sketch. So it's basically a sketch accompanying a waiver request.
Yeah, the vote you're taking is on the waiver of the Saldo. That's it.
I can add that while this application is being submitted as a sketch, under normal procedures, neighbors are not necessarily notified of a sketch, but given that they're asking for a waiver, we thought it prudent to have them go through that process so that we can vet any issues at that time. So we actually required them to go above and beyond the sketch submission because they are seeking that waiver.
And so thank you for that. And then, do you agree that because it's no changes in terms of size of congregation and size of employees, no need to address the parking or any additional stormwater, or are there any concerns there? Thoughts?
Well, I think from the stormwater standpoint, those issues would be addressed during the grading permit plan, as we would with any residential application coming in that wouldn't come before you. Obviously, as a non-residential project, it meets the requirements to go through a subdivision land development. With this type of project, it seemed like it was a little bit onerous on the applicant to go through that. So we kind of looked at it. Do they need zoning relief for this application? And the answer was no. Do they need any technical warrants of the subdivision land development application? The answer again was no. Do the improvements require full-blown stormwater management? And again, the answer was no. So we kind of took those three things into consideration in looking at the overall scope of the project, and then said, okay, this could be submitted as a sketch and come before you as a waiver. So staff was supportive of this applicant going through that process, given those three factors that we looked at and just the overall nature of the scope of work.
Other questions for the applicant?
I have a question about the porous paving. Where is the porous paving on this plan?
That's existing parking area.
None of that is proposed. It's
No,
all
yeah.
existing.
I have a minor question. The corridor, that's the expansion of impervious, right? That is?
That's
okay.
correct, yes.
Any other questions?
Were they at all close on there's nothing about this, they weren't at all close, you weren't at all close on your parking calculations when you were before us for other additions? The calculations for parking, I mean, you have more than sufficient parking? They're not on here, that's what I'm just curious.
It is based on the seating in the chapel, yes, and it meets those and exceeds with the additional 50 spaces on the north side of the site.
15?
No, there's an additional 50, parking spaces at the north end of the site that are in addition to the seating calculations for the chapel.
But is that used to offset the parking requirements for the existing education building?
Yes.
So then my question is was there always sufficient parking for the building, the parking lot near the building?
The number of spaces, existing spaces, is based on and meets the requirements for the number of seats in the chapel.
Okay.
No other questions? I'm going to ask for public comment.
Hi, my name's Marty McCartney. I live at 248 Ravenscliff, and I guess I am this property owner right over here. I do have some questions. I was before the Planning Commission in 2004 when this project was proposed. I had some major concerns about it at that point. Some of them were addressed. Some of them, the conditions to the approval have still not been complied with. So I'm not a 100% happy neighbor. One thing I would like to know before I go through some of the other things is what is the elevation? That was one of the potential things. What's the elevation of the second story going to be now?
37'6".
To answer that, come forward. And there should be a handheld mic there if you want.
37'6".
Okay, so how does that compare in terms of looking at the church, if you could show me? So can you show me exactly sort of where the existing, okay, so the existing goes, and then this is the proposed up to this level? Next question, I guess, and I have this just in general, is are there any further planned expansions of this church? Should this be it? I mean, I thought it was it in 2004. And I understand what you're saying, Kevin, in terms of the sketch plan and not going through the saldo and everything else, but I guess this is a good opportunity, and I do appreciate very much the fact that you notified the neighbors, because otherwise we wouldn't be having construction next door to us and never have had an opportunity to make any comment. So I think it's a good thing now, and I guess, is it appropriate if there are certain conditions agreed upon at this meeting that they be incorporated in terms of conditions to your grant of a waiver? Is that procedurally how we would go?
What kinds of conditions?
Well,
If you have something you want to
yes,
suggest.
There are two things that were a major problem before when the building was being built. One was the proposed lighting in the initial plan was incredibly invasive to the neighbors. The church was very accommodating and did reduce the lighting. Under the terms of their condition, they are supposed to turn off the lights by 10:30. There have been, over the years, repeated violations. I have written numerous times, given them dates, times, et cetera. It's often, my bedroom faces the back, so I could literally practically sit in bed and read a book with no lights on in my house, because it'll be 2:30 in the morning and everything's still lit up. I also have expressed the fact that I think it's a safety concern, because I have been advised that on occasion the church is actually left unlocked when people have forgotten. So it has gotten a lot better, and I would just ask that they please make sure that, in fact, it is not a problem anymore, because it certainly interferes with any potential enjoyment sitting in your backyard or even being inside your own home. The other thing was, because of such a substantial construction, and I understand and I'm delighted the fact that there is a growth in the membership of the church, but I loved the old church, because it was very quaint. It sort of fit in with the area. But one of the concerns that the neighbors and I did express at that time was the fact that there would be such a large structure and there would be such a growth of or an expansion of the parking lot. It has, and part of this agreement was to put landscaping in so as to shield, particularly the three lots, the Civitellas, the Kelsalls, and my place, so that we weren't sit in our backyards looking at like an Acme parking lot. I have looked at the minutes. It talks about low-level landscaping, which was not my recollection, since I was the one that proposed it and spoke about it, that there be much bigger landscaping, so that in fact we did have some sort of screen. And it just has never happened. At times there were some plants put in. I was over there again today, and there are wide expansions. And if you stand in my yard, if you stand in any of the three properties, you're just looking at all the cars coming in. You have the lights, and plus the fact it's very unattractive, and I think it's had a very negative effect on our marketability of our homes. So in that regard, I would like there to be some encouragement and some agreement that in fact you work with the neighbors, and that in fact what was proposed, what was agreed upon in 2004 is in fact put into effect. That's one of my first points. The second thing is I'd like to have some idea as to when the proposed construction would start, how long it's proposed to take to do the construction, and as with the prior time, there was an agreement in terms of construction hours, so that it did not, again, interfere with our use and enjoyment of our properties. And I would like to have some discussion on that point too, so that in fact the neighbors are protected. And in fact, one of the neighbors, the Civitellas, their house is actively, it's being sold right now. And it definitely has impacted, if you look at their backyard, the fact that they are, and I think the Websters, who are adjacent, is also affected, but I have not stood in their yard to look to. And the last thing, I guess, at this juncture is because of the expansion, do your current chillers and other systems that are outdoors, are they going to be able to handle the expansion?
The existing chillers will be able to handle the expansion.
Okay, so there won't be any additional noise in that regard. I think those are my comments, and I would request that they be given serious consideration so as not to adversely impact the neighbors that were there prior to the latest expansion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can the applicant address the landscaping? Is there any landscaping proposed with the plan? And would like to hear the comments on the lighting and the
in terms of the landscaping, we can talk about it. I thought that we had met the requirements set forth, but I can understand what you're saying, so we can look at the landscaping along those houses. In terms of the lighting, we're in a funny place electrically, and sometimes our timers, when the power goes out, our timers get off, and so I think that's some of the lighting, except for Christmas Eve when we actually have to be. Right, I figured. In terms of the start of the project, we don't have all the money yet. I think the earliest start would be the fall of 2013, and we're looking about it like a year of construction, about 4 months of the heavy construction, raising the roof, and then interior work.
Thank you.
Ma'am?
Yes.
Ma'am, one other thing that I want to be sure about, and this was...
Come up to the mic first,
Excuse me.
so we can hear you. Go right ahead.
When the last construction was done, and the church and I disagree on this, though I lived through it, there were, our houses shook from some of the work they did, and I had damage to my house. Their expert said it wasn't caused by this. I know what my house looked like because I had had it painted, and I know what it looked like after I stood there and everything rattled in my house. So I'm concerned about what kind of equipment's now going to be coming in to do this work again, because I just have gone through and had all the stucco fixed and my house painted again, and I just really don't want to suffer any more damage.
I have a comment on that, and you're probably aware of it too. There was a beach replenishment project done recently where I have a house, and you can have a survey done of your pre-existing conditions if the applicant's willing to do this in your house, and then after the construction is done, you'll have a baseline to compare against.
I think that's a good idea.
I actually wanted to chime in on that. I just had dinner with some friends who are neighbors at Agnes Irwin. Nick's gone. Oh, bummer. They were complimenting what good neighbors Agnes Irwin had been in the recent, they're doing a lot of blasting work, and they were relaying to me what a nice job Agnes Irwin had gone in. They took pictures of the houses, the neighboring houses, because they were doing some blasting work, and all agreed on what was the existing conditions, and then are going in now that the blasting is done to inspect, and we'll make right anything that might have been disturbed, which I was really glad to hear that Irwin's was so proactive in that regard.
Well, and I think that is a good idea, but I guess procedurally, how would this work? I mean, you said that we could talk about the plantings in that, but I would really like to have some sort of agreement in terms of the construction schedule and the timing. Previously, obviously, I know the township doesn't allow any construction on Sundays, and, and I know it can't start till 7 o'clock in the morning, if I'm correct. Is that correct? But I'd like a reasonable cutoff on Saturdays, so that, so I don't know, procedurally, how do we go about getting an agreement on the record?
Well, you're not going to get an agreement tonight on that, because this planning commission is going to make a recommendation, and it seems to me that one of the conditions ought to be, you talked about a 2004 approval, and there's some conditions. So I think Kevin's going to look into that and see what conditions were attached to that and whether or not there's any existing issues. In terms of other conditions, landscaping, timing of the construction, we don't know if they're doing blasting yet, but if blasting's there, then that's something that the township has some regulations with respect to that. But this will go to the Board of Commissioners. I don't know whether it'll be this month or next month, but you should put something in writing after you speak with the church, and whatever agreement you come to, communicate that to Kevin. Kevin can present it to the board. And any other things that you don't agree on, but you think ought to be attached as conditions, do that also.
Thank you very much.
But we don't know, we don't have the 2004 approval here tonight. We don't know what, if anything, was met or not met, but ultimately the Board of Commissioners is going to make a decision on this waiver.
Thank you very much.
Any other public comment?
Hi there, Angus Kelsall, 246 Ravenscliff. The picture's gone now, but I have the bulk of the sketch back. So I would be, that'd be me there, so I get the bulk of that. I've got three, I don't want to duplicate too much. I've got 3 major points, or 3 points anyway. Screening, noise and maintenance. The screening one really is, you can see from, if you can imagine sitting there, we can see the cars coming up all the way around there most of the day. evening with the lights on, of course, and then and you can see from inside the car all the way through. Then the general one is along the back, the lack of screening. I think the elevation, I'm guessing, about 6 foot, so we're probably about 10 foot up. So looking down on them, you're going to need some pretty sizable trees along the back to cut out the car park. So you can just imagine we get a complete view of the car park. In winter, obviously, it's just a complete car park with parking signs and handicap signs and lights. Looks nice in the snow, but whatever. In the summer, I've put in about 30 trees to make it around here, evergreens and some other trees, so I'm cutting it out as much as possible. But I'd have thought it's a lovely big church, it would be a very small amount of money compared to the value of the church to put in, some decent-sized evergreens along the path. Just this area here, there's plenty of room, it's all open, and you could put evergreens in there of a reasonable size and it would cut everything out. The second one is the noise. You often get, the church is fine, nice people and all that. I hate to be picky, but you do get the big coaches coming up with events, I guess weddings, coming up. Yeah, and idling, and it's hot in the US, I understand that, and things are idling for an hour. So if you had, again, evergreens down there, it might just cut out some of the noise. And the third one is I'd say the maintenance aspect of it. I mean, it's spending a lot of money on doing stuff, which is great, but along my border, we've got, vines, decaying tree, broken glass, those stingy nightshade things that come over the side. So just generally, that could be cleared up. And my side's not perfect either, but that would be the third one there. So just generally, I think, put some decent screening in there, and then we can, on either side of it, and we can leave the church to themselves, and say they're generally decent people there, but just, the coaches and the noise and looking at the car park all day, it's a little bit dull. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Any final questions for the applicant or the staff?
There's not going to be any additional lighting or anything along there, right? No exterior lighting? Okay. As a matter of my interest, do you have exterior lighting along your parking lots along the, whatever, that's the east edge?
There are parking lights that face down
from the building.
There are a couple lights on the building that
Okay.
that are motion detector that are on at night when people walk past.
I was just wondering if there were any poles or something along the outer edge of the parking lot. The answer is no.
There are some poles on the outer edge of the parking lot that face in that have low level light that turn off in theory at 10:30.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions?
It's not about this plan. But when this came up last month, that Valley Forge had submitted a waiver, and then it turned out the applicant didn't come up. And we had a long meeting last month, if I remember correctly. So I didn't bring it up at the end of the meeting under new business, and I'm going to bring it up now in case the next application is long, and I don't want to forget. Separate from taking the vote on this, considering this waiver, we should talk about as a group, if this type of request is going to become more common, we should have a sense ahead of time what we as a group feel like is some standards. And I'm not saying hard and fast rules, but something so that applicants aren't left feeling like, well, we like this person and we don't like that, or we just like that plan and we don't like, we should have probably some idea of what common, Kevin mentioned really, he mentioned the three that he was considering as staff, and maybe listening to Kevin's thoughts, we should perhaps come up with some standards, because my concern is that we're going to start to see more of these. And my guess is that in the past there were applications that came in that staff made the decision to push through as grading permits or building permits, and that was their prerogative perhaps. And I give Kevin a lot of credit, thank you, for wanting to make sure that these requests for waivers, particularly in very de minimis areas are still given a public airing. You know, the neighbors deserve that. I was glad to hear that letters went out to neighbors. Things like that, we should make sure is going to be kind of a standard. We don't have it in our administrative code to always grant these, but.
We are working on a standard.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah. I mean, there's this situation, and then there's a situation where it still comes in for a formal plan, but there's no need to do 2 steps, preliminary, final. So we're working on adding some language to this. This has been discussed. It was discussed at one of the board meetings, and there's some other changes in Saldo that there's a lot of ordinances backing up in line that are going to be coming your way. That's one of them. But, you know, that becomes a judgment call, though, by Kevin, really, in terms of, you know, whether technically it might be a land development, but it doesn't make any sense substantively to have someone go through a full-blown engineer plan and process, but because we can pick it up with a grading permit application.
Well, and yet we would always want to make sure, you know, neighbors came in with concerns, you know, and they need a venue to have them aired.
I just have one further clarification. Could you please clarify, are you adding 2 stories, or is it going to be a total of 2 stories?
We're adding 1 story above the existing.
And what is the height of the current building? I mean, I saw what you showed me, but I don't see any measurements on it. That's what I was wondering.
Do you want to scale? We'll look.
This is the side facing your property.
I know, I just have a basic question. How many feet is it currently, and how many, are you doubling the height? Is it 2.5 times the height? I think that's relevant for my figuring out in terms of. Do you have any plans that show the actual elevations, current existing conditions and proposed conditions? But I mean in terms of the actual elevations. Okay. Could you kindly get that information to me? There you go. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
On that same drawing, maybe it's helpful. This, can you come up to the table here just so I can kind of walk you through? This line is the roof line of the current fellowship building, correct? The roof, you're showing the roof line of the fellowship building here. So you're raising the roof and you're coming out from the current pitched roof. Is that correct? So the height only changes. Okay. Okay, so it increases. I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Oh, I can't see. So it just is literally raising the same gable roof structure up another floor.
Mm-hmm.
Susan, just to follow up on your comments on the process and procedures that staff are using, I don't make this decision as to advising the applicant to proceed in this manner by myself. I run this through the rest of staff, through the township manager, and we all kind of agree on a consensus, and at which point we then would advise the applicant to come in front of you. So at no point in time would staff not be on board on one of these applications.
Can we just talk in general about the advantages of taking this approach?
Well, when you go through the normal subdivision land development process, you're in front of the Planning Commission 2 times in probably in front of the commissioners at least 4 times. And if everything goes through you just once. In this process, so you're looking at a minimum of 6. We're trying to reduce that down on these types of projects so that we still get it out and vet it to the public and still have the open dialogue, but then cut down on the amount of time and the cost of the plans to prepare a fully set of engineered plans when that may not be appropriate or necessary. It's more trying to help provide some flexibility and streamline the process.
So, for instance, Regina, one of the guidelines that I would have, as I kind of thought about this in my head is I wouldn't even consider this personally. I'm not saying this is how everybody feels. I wouldn't even consider this if it were not a not-for-profit. That there's a great deal of expense involved in the whole process. And for me, I'd consider it for nonprofits, for churches, and other nonprofits. I wouldn't consider it for a for-profit business necessarily. I mean, I wouldn't. That's not, but I'm only one vote.
So other than saving meeting time, what will it save the applicant other than spending time in front of the boards?
It helps them proceed with their project. It may help them proceed with their project in a slightly faster time frame. There's the cost of preparing the plans as well as attending the meeting, so there's a cost savings with that as well.
So the plans that would normally be prepared are not going to be required for their permits? I'm a little
To the level
confused.
that a subdivision land development application plan set would be to submit a grading plan or building plans, no. It's significantly reduced.
So things like the surrounding area and that type of information, it will be left off?
Generally, we would require them to meet the sketch plan requirements and show some adjacent areas. Fortunately for this applicant, they had a previous application, so they had a lot of that available, which probably saved them some time in preparing that. But we'd want to see the context of the improvement with the surrounding area. And that's why we're also notifying the neighbors as we would for any other plan, so that if there are issues, the neighbors are aware of it and they can come out and voice their concerns.
So moving forward, the intention for these types of procedures would be a meeting just as we had here with a presentation at this level of detail with sketch plans and things. Obviously, you would have preferred to have dimensions. But other than that, we've seen pretty much, this is what we should expect to see for other applications of this type for a waiver?
Yes, and whether or not you would choose to concur with staff's recommendation, it was just our recommendation to get it in front of you for your consideration. You may look at an application, whether it's this one or another one, and say, no, we're not comfortable going through this process, and not make a recommendation for a waiver.
It also strikes me that it's a savings to the township because, Gilmore doesn't have to write the extended letter, et cetera, et cetera. In Upper Merion Township, which, I guess in comparison to Radnor is a little wilder and crazier, but recently I know that you could do a commercial edition of up to 5,000 square feet and have a streamlined process. I think one of the criteria here might be not so much whether it's a not-for-profit or a business, but whether it's 1,500 square feet or 1,000 square feet, something like that. Again, there would be other criteria. If it's on a tiny lot, 1,000 square feet can be huge, but if in a big project like this, this is a small thing.
That was actually one of the considerations that we had used. 1,500 square feet is the cutoff for stormwater management versus infiltration. So at that point, if they're going through the stormwater management on a requirement basis, and there will be some applications that may come in front of you that say, we recognize that there's a need for stormwater in consideration of the waiver, we'll do X, Y, and Z, and that may include stormwater where it wasn't required, even though infiltration may have been required. So there may be some benefit coming to the township end of these projects. But the 1,500 square feet seemed like it married up with our grading permit process where it got into a little bit more in depth of a review. So I felt if there was that level of improvements that it should meet the regular process as one of the threshold issues to consider.
But if there's no, well, it's actually, I'm glad you said that because I got reminded of, there's a member in the audience who's very much up to date on rain gardens. And I was wondering if in these types of situations when they're not going to be required to do infiltration or required to do stormwater, as part of this waivering process, would you maybe ask applicants to consider adding things that are relatively low cost, but do help with impervious, like a rain garden or, something that just continues to help Radnor whenever it can, without it being full-blown stormwater management.
I think if that is something that the Planning Commission sees as a benefit to a project come in front, that's part of the dialogue through the process, and that can be part of your recommendation in a condition on the waiver. And I guess it would depend on how the applicant feels about that as part of the discussion process.
And because, this property is still high up off of the ground, and, everything comes down to the bottom of Valley Forge Road. I look at that 850-foot square addition in the front and thought, nice rain garden in the grass might be really, it's not going to fix everything in the world, but everywhere where we can ask applicants to try to make a little improvement to help, is it worth asking?
Just to be clear, on this application or any other seeking the waiver, even if you were to recommend a waiver of land development and it was granted, they'd still be coming through the grading permit process, which would trigger stormwater management. So it wouldn't mean they'd be getting a waiver from stormwater management. They'd still be doing what's required for stormwater management.
One other question. The existing building as it stands, does it meet our stormwater management requirements as existing?
Actually, after this application was submitted, they actually gave me some stormwater management calculations which were previously approved for an addition that never occurred. So to make a long story short, the existing building is compliant, and in addition, there are approved calculations and an approved design for additional impervious surface which would be encompassed by this project.
So you're saying they have more than an adequate?
They've submitted, I haven't reviewed the calculations, but they've submitted calculations which they say does justify that.
Well, would we be in a position to say that we want to grant this waiver provided that the stormwater management is as?
Sure, you could do that, but I was saying either way, they're going to have to come in for a grading permit before they start any of this work, and that grading permit's going to trigger the whole stormwater review process. So either way, either direction you go, they're still going to have to comply with the stormwater management ordinance.
So really, there's no need for us to put that in there?
Correct.
There wouldn't be a necessary need, but if there was something that you thought that they may have an opportunity to go above and beyond what would be required, and there was a specific site constraint or an opportunity to provide, let's say, a stormwater basin rain garden where an infiltration pit may have only been required, and we get that much more from a stormwater standpoint, then yes, you would have that opportunity to make that request if you felt it was warranted.
Okay, do we have a motion on this request from anyone?
I'll move we accept this, make a recommend that we proceed with it, yes.
So we have a motion to grant the waiver. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Our next applicant is SD 2012 D07 sketch plan of Academy of Notre Dame, Denver, to construct a new track, softball and soccer fields, a gym, a maintenance building, in additions to the existing performing arts building. Included are new parking areas and modifications to the access drive and circulation roadways, and an addition of the new entrance drive from Godfrey Road at 560 Spa Road, Villanova. The applicant is present. Thank you. Give us a second to get organized, and we will turn it over to you.
Good evening. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to present tonight. My name is Mary Waring. I'm from the Academy of Notre Dame, and with me in our audience is our principal, Dr. Joe D'Angelo, our director of facilities, Bill McNevich. Academy of Notre Dame is an all-girls school, grades 6 through 12. Our current enrollment is about 500 students. In February of 2009, we began a strategic plan, which was completed about a year later. The strategic plan involved several rounds of discussion between students, faculty, board members, and we have come up with a campus master plan, or a long-range concept plan for the next 10 or 15 years. And we are going to introduce that to you tonight. This has included several rounds of input, and most recently on June 7th, we invited over 150 neighbors to attend a meeting so that we would get some input from them. So on June 7th at the Academy of Notre Dame, we opened up our library and invited people in to see the existing facilities and also to get their feedback on the plans that you're going to see tonight. Following that, we followed the township's regulations and did the certified mailing to the neighbors as well. So we had some good positive dialogue, a nice exchange of information, and we are pleased to present our sketch plan tonight. I'm going to invite Carl Creenan, our architect, to come and present the plans. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Carl Creenan, ABHA Architects. We were brought on board probably about a year ago after their strategic plan was completed to facilitate master planning for what's really a long-range plan for the Academy, probably over a 10 or 15-year period. I think the things that you're going to be seeing tonight with Momini Associates, represented by David Fiorello here as a civil engineer, we together prepared the plan that you see here. The master plan that we had done included involving a lot of constituencies throughout the Academy, and then most recently with the neighbors, as Mary mentioned here. Again, I want to emphasize this is not this is a sketch plan. This is a long-range plan, and we really wanted to bring it forward because some of the ideas, as you know, are required waivers or variances. So we wanted to vet those out on the front end. Actually, we haven't completed the master plan, but we knew that a lot of the things that they wanted to do, since they initiated waivers, we wanted to get kind of resolution to that or opinions on those so that we could complete our master plan and therefore move forward eventually with a land development plan, I think is the goal. So that's where we are. And then I presumed I'd move into kind of describing what we're talking about here. The master plan included a lot of renovations to all of the light brown buildings here, which are really internal renovations, particularly within the mansion itself. That's probably one of the highest priorities, and that's actually give you a little more orientation just where you are with the overall site. Sproul Road is along here, and Godfrey is here. Larchwood Avenue, which has some residents very close by, is there. And then this part of the sort of a dogleg area is also part of the Academy's property. There's an entry drive, very close proximity to this corner here. Actually, thank you. What you're seeing here is the actually existing plan. Might give you a little bit of better reference of what exists now. Here's the entry drive to the mansion building, which is the original Geist Mansion. It currently has academic uses. There's renovations plan, internal renovations to this historic building, and also some renovations to what was a former carriage house building, which also is used for academics, all internal and various degrees of renovation. After that, there were academic buildings built on the site in the 70s, 80s, and some renovations, so continued renovations, all interior with that area. There are some original buildings on this side, what they call North Campus cottage-type buildings. Those are used for academic uses. Some modest renovations are planned within that. And then some of the more recent buildings, there was an art center built here. Almost nothing's going to happen in that building. It's more recent, very subtle things. And then there was a gymnasium and library and support spaces, additional classrooms that were built within the last 10 years here. And again, very few renovations are actually happening within that. Other buildings on the site, there is what was originally an auxiliary gym. Actually, it was part of the original complex here, a support building. It's currently used as a dance building, primarily, but it's rather old. And then there was a garage built in much more recent years, which is really just a maintenance building for the staff. The gray areas are parking areas of various vintages. You can see the gray area drives, entry drive, and exit out back out again. This is a 2-lane drive here and a drop-off. And these are the three. Actually, there's 4 fields that exist. This is a softball field, and overlaid with that is some sort of a multi-purpose area. So there are 4 fields that exist on the existing plan. I think primarily what we hear about tonight are some of the expansions, both to buildings and to impervious area. I'll start with the small ones and work up. There's a desire to enhance the performing arts within the school, and various ideas about new buildings or renovations that could do it. There's currently within this building right here, there is a multi-purpose room that serves both as an auxiliary gym and I hesitate to say performing arts. It's used for their theatrical performances. But was a real desire by the strategic plan to actually provide a much more enhanced performing arts complement to the school. So to do that, the idea was to convert the auxiliary gym into a dedicated only performing arts space. So in order to do that, there are some small additions on either side of that in the darker brown areas that you're seeing there. Dance rooms, classrooms, music classrooms, and so forth. And the box, which was the original gym with stage, would remain and be renovated. I think that's within right. Those additions are within right. So, but I just wanted to bring that to your attention. That will be added. The other thing, you remember there was a maintenance building approximately right here. Not a great position physically and visually on the site. So the idea was to move that building or build a new building back here, which would be kind of on the back corner of the site and screened by the significant amount of trees that you're seeing along there. That's one of the variances that we're requesting tonight. The other new building is really a replacement building, another replacement building for what is the dance building, which sits about right here right now. And so the desire here is actually to kind of go back into the same area with a larger footprint. If you would go back to if I went back to the other plan, you would see that there's an existing parking area right here, which is, actually, I think I'll show it because I think it gives a little bit more idea of what the existing condition here is. Parking's a problem for the school. There's lots of drivers, given the student body. And the way that they park now, this is more of a traditional parking area, and this is as well, but this is what they sort of call a stacked parking area, which, girls come in and they park stacked, which is okay, but it's problematic. First off, doesn't allow for a lot of green space, and if there's anybody that's in the middle that needs to move, that can become problematic. Additionally, this area are what were former tennis courts, and those have kind of been taken over for additional parking as well. So they sort of stack in that area as well. It doesn't function real well, and from a stormwater management function, it doesn't really drain well. Although these are all newer and these drains fine. So I think one of the concept was to try to gain some additional parking, but actually do it in a much more kind of sensitive way and a much more functional way than they have now. So if you look on the proposed plan, you see a plan that hopefully addresses the kind of current parking standards with green space and aisles and spaces that meet those dimensional requirements. And then lastly, which is probably the biggest impact on the site, is they have a very strong athletic program of some renown, but they're in the competition for students. And I guess some of the other students, look to some of the other of their competitors, so to speak, or other schools. And this is something that's very lacking with the academy is the ability to have an on-campus running track and sort of a dedicated field for varsity sports. So as you can see, it's a pretty significant size, getting a standard metric track there. And if you look at the other site, there were really no other good places to try to put a function like that on the site. So the location of this has initiated some of the require for a variance, given the setback along this property line, and addition along this property line. There still remain to be 4 fields as there were before, but this field becomes much more formalized. Right now, it's more of a practice field and a smaller field. This becomes again, more of a premier field, and allows the others, these other fields to be more kind of regularized and formalized. That's there's a lot more detail here, but briefly, what the variances are is for relief from the setback requirements of the relocated mansion building, allowing this building to hold the 125-foot setback line, which is the red line that is along here. When this addition was built, that was what they were held to, which is along this along this line, that 125-foot, currently now it's a 200-foot setback, so that would force this building to be further back there, which could really kind of impede the function of that parking lot. So it's relief for those two setbacks, and it's relief for the setback requirement of the running track. Some also a little more detail about the running track. It's not intended to have any fixed bleachers. It's not intended to have any lights. The site is fenced for security purposes, but the school is okay with it being a public use, by public meaning neighbors' use, if they would want to come and use the track. But again, that's something to be determined. The school is open to it, and we met with the neighbors. They thought that might be a nice thing to have, but that's their that's something I guess to be worked out. But that's kind of the intent. It's just for it's not for track competitions. It's just for the school and their stool meets or tri meets perhaps, but they're not going to have multiple events coming there. There is a pretty established wooded area and buffer along the north property line and along the Larchwood neighbors as well, and that would be maintained. Some of the trees along that, which you can see here, would need to be removed, and then this buffer yard established it's established here, but continue it along here. And that was one of the comments we got back from the neighbors meeting last month, is to definitely enhance that, or to build up the buffer along here and make sure that there's not as little as possible is taken down along here, so that the closest neighbors actually have as much screening as possible for all the development. And then last but not least is also part of the very long-term thinking of this, and this actually came from some staff that we had met with actually several months ago, was the idea of creating a sort of a relief entry road off of Godfrey that will take some of the heat off of the corner here between Sproul and Godfrey Road. So this is an entry drive. I don't think it's a variance issue, but obviously there's a lot of other issues related to that. But just so you know, long term they would like to have that as an entry drive. This would still be a one-way road through here. This would be two-way along here to kind of make this whole area of the main parking area functional, but it would be a one-way out like exists now. So these two entrances would function similarly, and this would just give an additional relief valve for traffic entry. I don't know, David, did you want to add anything that I might have missed?
Carl, I think you covered everything. The one thing that we tried to outline on this plan here is the darker gray would be what is new. The lighter gray is existing. So we do have the new roadway sort of outlined here that'll make it a little bit easier to see. Ultimately, stormwater management would be required with all the increase in impervious cover. We visually are figuring on something in the area of the track, underneath the track. We haven't worked out the details of that yet. Ultimately, the idea here is to get the Planning Commission's comments on the scheme, and then we would get into the engineering details as each individual. I'm not sure if the plan is to have this all done in one shot, do it piecemeal or whatever, but I think you're looking at a long-range plan tonight with the intent of doing things as fundraising permits.
That's correct. Yeah, I don't know if Mary mentioned, or maybe I did, but I think they're thinking this is more of a 10 to 15-year plan, and it certainly would not be done all at once. It would be done as funding and initiative allows. There also, I think I failed to mention that I think you said around a little over 500 students, which is I think historically been where they are. They're not intending to add students by any of these plans. It's really to stabilize and maintain their student body. It's a middle school and a high school population of girls.
What's the size of the buildings and the height proposed? Are they one-story, two-story, and about how big are they?
The maintenance building would be one story. The auxiliary gym would be one story. This is about, I think, 400 square feet, rough, plus or minus. This is about 11,000 square feet, I think. Do you have the? Yeah, I think you have the total. Both of those have buildings that were removed So, but I think generally it's about 11,000. About, did I say 4,000? 4,000, yeah. Those are one story. The two additions on, or saddlebags, sort of on either side of the Performing Arts Center are two-story pieces, because that part of the building is a two-story building. So on the lower level, there are sort of cafeteria functions, so it's to expand the cafeteria and get some more seats. And then on the upper floors, it's more for the performing arts pieces, fire stairs, and bringing sort of up to date on code. Our level development is actually pretty limited, because we are in the master planning stage. But I think as far as height, you could assume that would be, obviously it's a one-story building, and it's an auxiliary gym, so it would sort of have a lower elevation than a formal gym. But again, it's a gymnasium, so it has a taller, the underside would be about 22 feet to the structure. If history serves us, it's about the size of those buildings.
Could you maybe push that plan to the left, to your left, not too much, and then put the existing conditions plan up so that I can see the border of the property along?
Would it work if we turn them?
No, right, it was going to work just what I wanted.
Okay.
Just take that and put it right down. No, bring it. Put the one that's there, thank you, and just lay the other one on top of it, just like that. I just wanted to see the border of Larchwood, the existing conditions in terms of trees and buffers with what you're proposing. I just wanted to kind of look at them next to each other for just a moment and take that in, because the colored pictures are far superior to our plan. Thank you, that's all I wanted to say for that.
What's the black rectangle about the middle of the campus? Is that a,
Leave those up if you would, please.
yeah,
That's a raised terrace. There is a pool building that was part of the original outdoor pool that was part of the original mansion complex, and these are raised terraces, parterres, which have been maintained and are currently being upgraded, particularly the paving around the pool and the pool houses as well.
thank you.
But it's all part of the original, as is this element right here. So and there's also a significant grade change along this entire, very steep areas, probably the steepest on the site. So that really has prohibited us from really thinking of this area logically as a place to really develop. So,
Since you mentioned that, I noticed on the ones that you sent to us, which are black and white, and there are some substantial gradation lines up where hey, you go. Well,
Contours don't show up well in the color plan.
true enough, but there was another one.
We have the existing conditions plan, which is probably,
Oh, okay, I'm
This
sorry,
plan
I'm
also.
just not, well, the one,
we have a plan here that's sort of a conglomerate of plans that have been put together over the years with topography. We have 1-foot contours in some places and 2-foot contours in other places. So, we have contours in this area which are 1 foot. We have contours in this area here which is 1 foot. Sort of exaggerates the grading a little bit, but
right.
we have the slopes greater than 20% highlighted. I thought there was in the pointer here. They are areas here along the front. These are areas where the fields transition. I don't want to go back and say they're man-made steep slopes, but they are steep slopes that were created as a result of grading for the fields. There are some steeper slopes in here. Our surveyors picked that up. It was labeled a mulch pile. I didn't change it because, we left it there, but I think this is probably some areas that have been worked over the years. There's a small, very shallow detention basin in this area here that was probably put in for something years ago. We've outlined the slopes associated with that. There are some steep slopes down along the entry here, but for the most part, if you're looking at slopes, the area has some slope to it, but only the areas here that are outlined fall within the steep slope criteria of 20% or greater.
what jumped out at me, if you pull the other one up, was the apparent really steeps right at the corner of where you have the track.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the track is a significant sized element compared to the rest of the things on the site, as you'll see. So in order to get that to be flat, there are some significant grading that had to be done, but we thought that actually provided a benefit, particularly to the Larchwood neighbors, is the as you move to the west side of the track, if I can, to this side of the track, this actually is cut. So from the Larchwood properties, a lot of this will actually be depressed or be hidden by the cut that we're moving the track into. So
That'll be lower than it existing?
So this area actually is lower than the roadway and lower than the existing. And the roadway actually follows pretty closely to the existing grade, and obviously the trees beyond it are on the existing grade. So this would be cut into it. So the neighbors that are along there actually would sort of be looking over the top of the field. So it wouldn't be, even if there was, I mean, there won't be any light standards, there won't be any bleachers per se. It'll allow seating to happen on this bank. It's a perfect kind of grading so that you can use this as a seating area, natural seating area, rather than having bleachers. And so it's sort of a, I don't know, we thought, again, for these neighbors would be, if it had to be done, that would be the best way to go.
And one thing I wanted to point out is they are 1-foot contours, and that is a 3-to-1 slope. So it is a fairly, it's not a very steep slope, so to speak. It's not a major cut slope-wise. I mean, we have fill 3-to-1 and we have 3-to-1 cut, but we're not creating any vertical, very steep slopes, 1-to-1, 2-to-1. Or our slopes here are shown as a maximum or minimum 3-to-1.
Just given the distance of the track, it sort of adds up, so it looks like it's a major.
Isn't the water going to run into the middle of that?
Yes. Right now it's graded so that we envision that everything comes down to the edge of the track. The track will have a series, ultimately, once it's designed, we're figuring on this, having a series of drains around that, having everything drain to some type of a stormwater system in the center of the field that will provide a significant amount of recharge, being able to use that large area of the field.
You said you had a neighborhood meeting? You invited a bunch of neighbors? Somebody
I think
said
150
that.
were invited from within a half-mile radius.
I live at the bottom of this hill, and nobody on our street, half mile. I live at the bottom of the hill, which is a mile. Okay. It's because we didn't receive anything about this. When the last land development went through, you guys did something a few years ago. I can't remember what it was. Built something.
I could probably discuss that since
but
I engineered it.
Okay, great. But my question is not so much about that building. It's about I'm flummoxed by the need to add 100 parking spots but there's no increase in the population of the student body. I can't fathom how you got through a development plan a few years ago and had adequate parking, haven't increased your student body, but now you need to add 100 parking spaces. What are you planning on doing here?
Do you want to speak to that?
I think a lot of the parking spaces, as Carl had mentioned, are stacked spaces for the students. We're getting rid of those stacked spaces so that a lot of these spaces here sort of get spread out. Plus, it gives some parking for sports activities, things like that, during the off hours.
If I can react to that, I think by no means is it adding 100. I think it's recalculating so that the spaces that exist and are being used now are more towards the current code and more functional. I think the reality is, and again, I can't speak if this tennis court area was being used lastly, but it is being used now. And I don't think there's been an increase in population from, say, 10 years ago to now in the student population. It perhaps is just more students driving. I don't know, Mary, maybe you could speak better to that, but
this is also
by no means are we adding 100 new spaces to the overall plan.
This is almost kind of a question for staff, which I don't expect an answer tonight. This is a sketch plan, but I'm like trying to jive did we allow for stack parking in development plans in the past?
You're not going to get an answer.
Oh. No, I don't expect an answer tonight about the numbers, but I'm kind of blown away by that.
Actually, if I could just tag onto this, it might be helpful next time if you could explain to us in the stacked lots how many spaces how many cars you're putting in there now, but you must have a calculation as to how many cars legally fit in there. To your comment, if your comment is correct, if you're not actually, are you parking 100 more cars, or are you legally providing 100 spaces?
Yeah. We did a calculation about the amount of students that are parked in the lots on one of the last days before the exam season. And honestly, I don't remember the numbers, but the numbers compared to what are students that are actually parking in these lots to what are going to be parking in the new plan, there was only about 30 extra spaces. Because the reality is they're parking on the tennis courts, they're parking in grass areas next to the tennis courts. Again, and I don't know if that's in 10 years students drive more than they did before, but it's that's the reality of how many people are actually parking on there. Now, whether that was undersized on their last development, I don't know if we can speak to that.
Well, I mean, I guess that gets to kind of my point. And again, it's sketch, and so things need to be fleshed out, and there's other issues, so okay. But I don't see a parking calculation on the plans, and typically with the development of an institution, there's very specific parking calculations based on use and all sorts of things. We have all sorts of uses in our PI zoning or in our parking. So I think personally, I'm going to want to see that the current buildings you have and the current uses you have sufficient parking, that you tell me that you're not getting any more students, but you're adding 91. Let me correct my math. I did the math here. 91 parking spaces to just meet what you currently have. Something's just not adding up for me there, with no planned increase of student body.
Could you speak to the student body?
Truthfully, we would love to tell you we are increasing our student body. The highest student body we ever had was 538. We're at 505 right now. So we would love to see an increased enrollment, and we have the facilities for that based on our classroom space. So, but that is not the intention to really change the population. It is a private school, and we are looking for a good teacher-to-student ratio. So it is not our intent to change the enrollment, add like K through 5. Like, that is just not something that we're looking at all.
So the existing parking count, you have 199, including 66 stacked student parking spaces. Is that 66 spaces or 66 cars fitting in the stacked spaces?
Well, the spaces per se, it's room for 66 vehicles. There are 11 rows of 6 for the numbers. I'm not sure if that's exactly it, but I think it works out to be like that.
And David, is it right that your calculations did not include the tennis courts?
That is correct.
Or the overflow? So I think that's the reality of what's there, and that's why that 91 seems
So the difference
exorbitantly high
is the parking spaces in undesignated spots right now.
Exactly, yeah. And I think what we're trying to do is sort of formalize those areas that have de facto become overflow parking.
When was the neighborhood meeting?
Was it?
Pardon? So pretty much as school was winding down for neighborhoods and whatnot. Okay.
Pardon me?
I was noticing that the neighborhood meeting kind of was coming at the end of a school year, and as people kind of wind down and disperse for the summer, for me, is not the best time to have a neighborhood meeting to make sure you get all sorts of input on a big plan to a campus change.
Well, that wasn't deliberate. It just sort of worked out to be
timing.
the best.
That's when I wondered when the meeting was.
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions. First, did you consider keeping the exit driveway between the proposed track and the adjacent field rather than closer to the neighbors? Was that looked at all?
Yes, but the track would not allow, if you could see, it would actually impinge more on the setbacks and more on the existing parking and built areas as well. If I can, are you saying, did we look to put it here?
Put it between the two fields, the exit drive.
Oh, right. Well, that would have forced the that would have forced the stadium and the track, or the track and the field further away and further into where the steeper grades go. So it was actually, in order to sort of we certainly wanted to maintain the entrance, but having the road as a buffer was a lot cleaner than trying to put it between these two, the two fields.
I guess my concern there is that you'll need to remove more trees as a result of that roadway being there.
Well, but if the road moved to this side, then the track would move over. So one way or the other, you're probably taking out the same, and probably even more, because you need to have kind of appropriate setback between each of the fields. So it might have taken up, we thought it took up a little bit more space. And you couldn't have maintained the existing road. It would have to be, you would have to reconfigure it. It also allows sort of a cleaner access around the back side of the site, so that you don't have, here's another thing. So you don't have cars and athletes and students crossing. You know, this creates a kind of a park. So really everybody comes in here, parks here, and then this is all pedestrian, athlete, no pedestrian conflict. And that was a strong desire for the school.
Well, I understand that, and I that makes perfect sense. The only concern there is, say, if you have a large event, if people are all parking on the exit road.
Well, it's not wide enough to park along that. That's why we kept it. If you look at proportionally to the other roads, it's much thinner. So you really, it's going to be a no parking road, as I understand it, right?
That's what I was wondering. Are you going to enforce no parking along that?
That's the intent.
Okay.
Yes.
And then next, the proposed auxiliary gym. Did you look at putting that closer to your other buildings and further away from the neighbors?
Yes. First off, desire to keep it near the parking, keep it in this zone rather than, say, back here. That's one thing. We really wanted to keep as much of the parking kind of together, so the other options would have been moved it, and to comply with what you're saying, is to really move it further into this parking lot. But then that would just put parking on the other side. So I think that could be a possibility. We thought this was, and actually when we started the process a while back, we understood that this red line here, which is the 125-foot setback, was the rule. We were only upon getting the comments a few weeks ago that we saw that actually that this building needed to be complied with the 200-foot setback, that we realized that.
Could you put back up the colored picture? It's just easier to see.
Sure.
So you may possibly be able to comply with that if needed for neighbors.
Yeah, I think we could. And actually, you see the two lines here. That's the 125. That's the 200. So, yeah, I think that's a possibility. Circulation-wise, it might be a little. This kind of helped by having this kind of collector lane in front of the auxiliary gym. Kind of leads easily into this parking lot. And again, we really tried to not to have to modify this. I think there might be some slight modification that would need to happen. Plus, we're trying to limit the amount of girls who would have to park sort of on the backside. So, but I guess that's a possibility.
So I know the property pretty well because, as I said, I'm a neighbor. And I know that. So I know that back parking lot is the area you guys redid a couple of years ago, and it looks. It does look nice.
And here.
Lovely. But I do, for the same rationale that you're talking about, wanting to put the driveway closer to Larchwood.
Mm-hmm.
I would tell you that I think there's an argument to be taking that gymnasium out of the middle of that parking lot and maybe not touch the bottom part of the lot that you created a couple of years ago, but bring that gymnasium more into your into the neighborhood of all the other buildings, and get it away from the setback. And that little maintenance. More, maybe even right up to this driveway, such that people could be dropped off at the curved, that you could create a drop off, of the driveway there for the use of the gymnasium. Bring it way, way, way closer. I would have even said on the other side of the that curve, that drive part, that top part of the drive, the other way, and curve it the other way and bring that building so that it's on the east side of that driveway. But get it far, far away from the neighbors. And then the other thing is that little maintenance building down in that pretty area that's very wooded, that small maintenance building, that is the big, loud maintenance trucks, putting it right in those neighbors' backyard. I've got to think, as much as I love the little cottage and the garden, and I'm always asking the guy how he grows stuff there without getting the deer eating his stuff, I've got to believe that you could put that maintenance garage, because it's quite a bit smaller than the gym, closer to the gatehouse at Godfrey. Find a spot that's not so steep or whatever, and get it away from the neighbors. Because on the other side, it's Overbrook. They're not going to care if there's a maintenance truck or a garage on Godfrey. And this plan, the change that happened a few years ago, when you changed the flow of traffic and made the exit onto Sproul Road one way. My daughter was at another school, a number of years ago, and we would come and play games here. So I remember the years when you could come in off of the other entrance on Sproul, and now it's just the one-way deal. Traffic on Godfrey is horrible for us. When I come up the bottom of that hill to go anywhere, and it's after 7:25, it's horrible. And you got to think of a different way to deal with. Godfrey's that narrow little road, and I know that you didn't make the configuration, but really we got to think about if there's a way to redo that area or this. I understand from internal your campus of making it a one-way exit, but it just continues to put, bunches of traffic coming in Godfrey. Is this little hook meant to be an exit out of Godfrey? So now we have two exits onto Godfrey?
Entrance only.
Entrance only. How are you going to police that? How are you going to not have people come in at the light and drop their kid off right there and scoot out to get ahead of all the people who are down here at the bottom entrance waiting in the huge long line on Godfrey, because we know what the light is like there. And then the rest of us are stuck at the bottom of the hill down near the golf club.
Well, it is pretty close to that entrance, so.
I know, so the parents will drop their kids off. I promise you, they will drop their kids off and try to scoot out that and make it an exit. So it needs some thought. The way it's designed, you're going to have to give that some thought, because parents will do that. They'll want to avoid circling all the way through the campus to then be stuck at the gatehouse exit and having to wait in the long line to get up Godfrey.
Is the intention to prevent people from having to go all the way down Godfrey and back around? Is that what that?
Yes.
So you're hoping that that'll eliminate some of the traffic at the light?
Of I think some of the previous gentlemen that we met with several months ago, actually almost last summer, that request, and the school heard it and said, geez, that would be great for us too. So.
Do you mean to avoid having to go all the way up Godfrey to get into the property?
Yes.
What the far bigger problem is the line of people who are coming out the gate, what I call the gatehouse exit, after they've dropped their kids off and are looking to go back up Godfrey to go back onto Sproul, because the people on Sproul, they get stacked on Sproul, which there was something in the notes about maybe making a turn lane, right? Something on Sproul. Thank you. Those people are waiting out on the main collector road. Waiting on Godfrey it's so much smaller. It gets backed up so much quicker.
I think if I can speak for the school, I think they would be completely open to how the township and the state regard all of the entrances here and willing to work to improve that. I think, like you said, when we brought that up last time, they said no. They didn't want people coming out there because I suppose it was a hazard having people coming out on that road as it was before.
Well, it doesn't have a light. That's the difference.
Yeah. So speaking for the school, they'd be open to, making it work. However the authorities that be determine that from a more global perspective.
Just going back to a couple other thoughts when I looked at this, I have some friends who live on Larchwood, and I recall a couple of years ago them recounting to me that issues of lights and the screening not holding up, as a buffer between the properties, and that the old parking lot, there are people's whose headlights, flash into people's houses on Larchwood. And I'm just trying to, and that was before this, I'm just trying to ballpark, how many trees are you talking about taking out in this plan?
That's hard to say, but just to give you an idea here, this is a 125-foot setback, so the tree line is probably 60 or 70 feet deep along all of this, and then I think the areas where you're talking about, and actually we spoke to the neighbor, these few black marks here, those are the trees that he planted. So I think we would beef up this buffer so it would be really a 50-foot depth of vegetation to kind of, I think here's not the problem. The problem is probably here. And I think the plan of the school was to beef that up to address that.
But you're also just making parking lot much, much, much closer than what the existing condition is. And that's why I had you put up the existing conditions earlier.
This drive, there's a drive that actually exists along the back side of here, so that's already there. So yeah, we're extending that out and putting that parking. That's one of the waivers, correct.
And all those trees around the track, you were talking about taking all of those out?
Yeah. More trees.
They'll just be gone.
What is the elevation of the road relative to the backyards along Larchmont?
This follows the existing grade. What do you want to show the grading plan? The road follows pretty closely to the existing grade, so you would maintain that. Where the grade changes really is along here.
Actually, that wasn't my question, though.
There is a grading fall off generally as it falls down, so the road is somewhat higher.
Currently, it's higher.
Currently, the ground here is currently higher than the adjacent neighbors.
Okay.
So with the road following the existing contours, the road would be at an elevation roughly, I'm going to say, 5 to 10 feet higher than the adjoining properties.
Okay. All right. And then, so the road is higher than the adjoining part. So the road is, in essence, the crown,
Yes.
because the field will fall off from the road.
Correct.
Ms. Stern, you're asking about parking here and the calculations that we certainly owe you a better calculation of really what exists and what's proposed. But I think if they were to get rid of that parking area that we're asking for the waiver, they would actually, in reality, probably have less parking spaces than they functionally have right now. So that's part of I think the waiver request is to, again, more formalize the parking.
You did meet with the neighbors. What was your impression? What were their concerns, and how were you able to address them?
You want to speak to that? I mean, as Mary said, they were generally positive. I think they like being informed about what some of the thoughts were. I think screening, buffering along that Larchwood. I don't think we had many comments from the surrounding neighbors. There was a woman that was not a neighbor, but was very interested in the environmental impact and brought up issues of rain garden, sensitivity towards the type of materials being used, certainly native plants. And, we took some pretty good notes on that as the plan moves forward. But as far as the neighbors, I think the main thing was the buffering, between their edge.
And just to maintain the type of tree and the arborist and, discussion so that it still looks good. It's a beautiful property. We've been a good neighbor, and, we have had some incidences where trees have fallen, fences have been broken. Our guys go right over as soon as we receive a call from anybody because we want to be a good neighbor.
Are you planning a turf field for the track and the soccer?
Possibly that we have 2 bids, one for a turf field, one for a grass field. A lot of discussion has to happen on that.
Oftentimes what happens with the turf fields is because of the increased cost, there's a lot of pressure to install lights and extend, and because it's usable more days of the year and all times of the day and all that, and that you'll come back and be wanting to put in lights at a turf field around the track, or have nighttime track events or weekend track events. I mean, I'm looking at this parking lot that's situated right next to this track, and you're telling me no increase in student population, and I'm wondering what other uses you're proposing here.
We currently do rentals at a very minimum. I mean, everything on our property really is for our students. There are a few things, a few charities come in and use our gym. We do have some CYO Archdiocesan comes in for and uses our gym, but it's very minimal, and our board has asked us to stay away from that. You know, the damage to the property, the security, the fact that we don't have maintenance on staff 24/7, those kinds of things. So our plan is really for our girls, and this track is a big track for Notre Dame, for a school that doesn't have a track, but it would not be a track that could handle a state meet or an area meet. You know, it would just be the local meets and practice.
And again, the school is absolutely committed to not putting lights there. I mean, I would think that could be a condition of the plan, and I'm sure any neighbor that sees a light pole going up would be able to react pretty quickly to that. So, but that's certainly not the intent, or fix bleachers as well.
I mean, don't they have to come in and reapply for lights? Or can they just put lights up?
Currently, the limit is 38 feet in the, I know it's in the PLU district. This is the PI, so I'd have to take a look at the maximum building height requirements. But lights would have to fall under the maximum building height requirements for the district.
So so if the track is in, they can legally put lights up?
Correct.
Okay.
Can it be a condition that you say, in order to get agreement, that you don't do it?
That's yes, to answer you, because Irwin's agreed to that with their tennis courts that they agreed to not put lights in, right? When we did the athletic center, they said no lights, and it's in the plan.
David, let's switch over for a second down your list of comments. I'm not concerned about the administrative ones, but major issues that you've addressed, and we can have the applicant comment on those, please.
Yeah, I mean, we've touched on most of them. There's several variances that the plan as proposed would be required to obtain for the parking lot, for the maintenance building, for the gymnasium, the soccer field and track. They would all require variances. Also, there's a section that requires a 45-foot separation between buildings, and the gymnasium in its currently proposed location is closer to the cottage than that, so there'd be a variance or a plan modification necessary to accommodate that. As Susan touched on, we really recommend there be an inventory of the parking taken. In other words, the uses on the site be evaluated as to how many parking spaces are required for each use, and so we can get a feel for if the existing site and the proposed site are compliant with our zoning ordinance. And again, a variance would be required for the steep slope disturbance for both the soccer field and the track area. There's a requirement for sidewalk and curbing along Godfrey, so that's something that's going to have to be looked at, whether the township would like to see that put in place. And also, the police department is recommending several upgrades for the intersection of Sproul and Godfrey, namely some preemption and a northbound left turn arrow for Sproul Road. So those are the high points. I mean, most of the other items are minor issues.
I thought Godfrey's a state road. Will they need to talk to PennDOT about a curb cut?
Yeah, I mean, yes, the walls. Yes, it is a state road. Yes.
Any other questions for the applicant or Dave? If not, we'll move to public comment. Please come forward.
Excuse me, just one clarification. The variance about the 45 versus the 43-foot setback, if we could remove that, because we can easily comply with that one. So
right, I understand. You probably can make that go away, but yes.
Hi, we're Nancy and John Akoff at 705 Larchwood Lane.
Which is, we're right here.
We're a little concerned about what we're hearing tonight because we were under the impression that, the road along here that backs up to what is really a fairly steep hill and then slopes back down to what's going to be their new proposed soccer field. There's a lot of space that's been taken away, and from what I'm hearing, it sounds like the traffic, the car traffic along here is going to be higher than the soccer field. So I'm concerned about noise, seeing any of the cars going by. Even though I'm not sure I really understand what the conditions are on the use of the soccer fields and the track field. It sounds like the track field's just going to be used for training, but because Notre Dame has a certain plan for their girls, and they have to stay very competitive with other schools, is there maybe a possibility that this is going to become more of an active area too, so there would be more noise? So, but my real concern is the vehicle's driveway and just how high that road is going to be. I think I heard it was going to be 10 or 15 feet higher than the soccer field. Is that correct?
Yes. At this end. At the one end.
Which end? This end or this end?
Yeah.
Grab that mic,
right
Dave,
now,
if you don't mind.
If we can,
Dave,
the ground.
grab the hand mic,
Oh, I'm sorry.
please.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Right now, the ground rises up to, I guess, a high point and then falls off down again towards the soccer field. That road would ride along the high point of the road, or high point of the ground there. And then because the soccer field has to stay flat relative to the ground, that is being cut in there. So the soccer field is actually probably 10 to 15 feet lower than the roadway at this point in this corner.
Okay, so the cars will be flush with the top of the slope? Is that what you're saying?
They'll be at the top of the embankment now.
Yeah.
Where the embankment is, that's where the road.
That creates a major problem. And we can't allow that to go through, because right now we have a clear view over the top of that hill, and if that road or that new proposed road comes up to the top and the cars will be constantly going across the top of that, it'll be like having Sproul Road in our backyard.
And
it was our first assumption that when we first went to the meeting back in the beginning of June, that whole road area was going to be cut out, and the car elevation would be below any part of the hill.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to that, with the addition of the playing field and the track, we're concerned, as the other neighbors are, that the increase in just foot traffic, possibly through our backyards, over to Larchwood Lane, where people may be parking for additional events that may come, who knows, 4 or 5 years down the road. That's a concern.
Also, we already have a fence that goes around, that encloses our pool because Radnor Township demands that, of course. And what we were proposing on doing is actually taking or adding on to that fence and I guess putting another split rail fence down the back of our property. And Notre Dame's property, by the way, comes over the top of our hill. It doesn't show it on here, but Notre Dame's property comes over our hill, and it goes down on a very extreme diagonal to the Hurley's property, which is here. Okay, so technically, it's their property. Mm-hmm. So, and if that space is encroached upon, we really need a buffer. We really need the road to be graded down by the hockey field, level with the hockey field. We can put the fence in and maybe even put some trees in along the fence. But now, from what we're hearing tonight, we didn't hear this much at the first meeting. What we're hearing tonight is it's pretty big encroachment. or can be.
Can you explain that again when you say it comes over? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure I
understand.
follow that either.
It's hard to describe without seeing it, but looking from our backyard like this,
Microphone.
if we were looking at our backyard, we would be looking up the hill like this.
Okay.
And then it kind of levels off and starts to decline. Well, if you stand like at our driveway here, as we're looking up, everything is great. The property line from Notre Dame comes down across the back like this. So the road proposed is 25 feet from this property line that runs behind our house and then goes up, and then at the top of the hill, just as it starts to descend, that was where the new road would be coming by.
And on a higher grade than where the fields are now.
Understood.
We
Thank you.
We didn't understand that at the first meeting. We thought it was going to be level with the fields.
So I think what you guys were trying to say is that the ridge that's there, their property is on is on the, you can
It's on
see
the
it
other
because it
side
comes
of
down
that.
the ridge. That's all
Yeah.
you're saying.
And I do appreciate, Notre Dame inviting us for this dialogue. I myself went to a private girls' school academy. We know how important that is and what good educations they give. And we would like to work with you through this problem.
Sure.
Okay? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other public comment?
And just one more comment, too, about the lighting. I think it would be appropriate that there was something included that would eliminate any lighting at all around the track area, because I know what would happen in 5 years. We'd want to add, somebody would add some lights, which we wouldn't want. Thank you.
How hard would it be to move the road a little to a lower elevation, or would that screw up the, I'll call it the natural landscaping down towards the track? Is that an insurmountable problem?
Well, it's probably possible in this area to lower the grades. We were trying to keep the cut from the grade encroaching further into the green area that's between the roadway and the property line now. So if we lowered the roadway there, I think we could look at it either.
You were trying to maintain as much of
I
the
was
grade here.
I was trying to maintain the grade without a lot of cut in the roadway to begin with.
If we have to lower the road, then therefore you're creating more cut and removing more trees.
I was trying to work with the natural grade as we came up to here and then flattened out to follow that. I think it may be possible to depress this lower area here somewhat, but depressing that, it's going to grade into those areas where we have some trees existing already. And then, again, the intent with the grading was try to minimize the cut further into that area between the roadway and the property line itself.
Can you slide everything to the right and get the road on the down slope more?
Well,
I mean, it looks like physically you have the room to do it. Now, maybe you don't, but
well,
I know
probably
there's...
not, because, and not maintain the other fields.
Can't you have a retaining wall along that, the western edge of a roadway and drop the road? Let the ridge be up there, and then on Notre Dame's property, which, if you're looking to minimize impact on the neighbors, dropping the road and having the roadway down at the level of the track, and having some kind of,
Well, the
wall.
issue
You don't
with
have
that-
to lose as many trees that
Yeah,
way.
the
I get
issue
you lose your...
also is trying to keep the continuity of the roadway, because we have this area at a higher elevation, and if we lower our roadway, we'd have to work out that transition between the two elevations. We have this is, what I'll call, for lack of a better word, a plateau up here, a flatter area with this parking, and we're working our roadway up the existing grade and flattening out into this area here. If we were to lower this, we'd have to find a different way of transitioning in here and working these roadways together.
That part of the property is higher, sits higher.
Yes.
I think I'll play civil engineer for a little bit, but we were trying at all costs to avoid retaining walls. and try to maintain as much of a although this looks steep, it is somewhat more natural because it's all grassed. Oh, so, I'm sorry. We're trying to avoid retaining walls, if all possible, for costs, for maintenance, and just because they introduce something that's not as natural looking as we thought it would here. I think given that, though, I think your comment is a good one, and it really, maybe we could do it is if we could lower the sort of try to drop the roadway at its highest point, try to drop the roadway below so that it's, there's part of this berm actually is on this side of the road rather than on that side. So there's a lower berm road and then a little bit of berm, so the road is actually screened. I think that's probably possible where, at least in this area here.
I'm looking at that area there, and I think we can probably lower that roadway about 4 feet or so to create that point where the top of the vehicles would be below that.
And the headlights as well would be
headlights
kind
and
of,
so, and then try to work the transition.
You can't have cars up on a
berm it
ridge
up.
in somebody's backyard. I mean,
Yeah, or go the other way, just put a berm in. I mean, lower it 3 feet and put a 1 foot berm in or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's doable.
Sure.
We'll get there.
It sounds like a good start, and it sounds like maybe it would resolve the problem. Do you think there's any way maybe you could put up some other buffer, like at the top of the hill, like sizable trees? I don't mean like trees this big, but,
Can you, this is your house here?
A cup, yeah, 705. Mhm.
It's pretty dense right here. I think probably where your neighbor is.
Uh-huh.
It starts to get a little bit looser along here, so.
Yeah, this is completely open, I think, here.
So, I mean, I'm sure the school is open to, I mean, we've got you said 25 feet before you hit the road. It's actually about 70 feet from property line to where the road hits.
Could you use the microphone, please?
So, I'm sorry. I think Mr. Acuff mentioned it was about 25 feet from the property line to the road, but it's more like 75. And so we have that amount of area to beef up the buffer. And, I don't know if it's going to be 75 feet of trees, but it would be a lot more. And I think we could certainly willing to make this comparably dense to what's further down the line.
Okay, and also, it was understood when we moved in that we didn't put fencing to cut off that walkway up there because a lot of our neighbors used to take their kids, and now they're taking their grandkids to take walks on Notre Dame's property because you allow everybody to. And I guess what we could propose is maybe to extend our fence, but just keep an opening along the left side of it where people can still walk up and down. Okay?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they would definitely like that flexibility or neighborliness. So, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Any other further public comment? Why don't we go down the line if anybody wants to make some final comments? I think we've hit a lot. Skip, why don't I start with you on my left?
Or Steve, you mean?
Steve, you want to go first? Go ahead. It's all right.
It sounds like a lot of the variances are, at least around this one building, the gymnasium can be handled by the applicant. I like the plan of trying to mitigate the impact of the entrance road off of Sproul Road that's been discussed. And, if you come back showing some elevations, showing some more plantings, screenings, so the neighbors can get a sense of what it's like. The maintenance shed, I guess I'd like to understand a little more about its specific use and what neighbors it's impacting down there. Nobody seems to be complaining about it. Physically, it does seem like a good location to place it. It would have less impact on Godfrey Road, but putting a maintenance shed on Godfrey Road in the front of the property doesn't seem the most aesthetically pleasing for all parties. So I guess I would, as of now, be in favor of its current location. And then we talked about the lights and adding that. So,
Skip?
I don't know the property as well as some of the planning commission members, but it seems like it's a shame to keep loading this area up with the neighbors right there, and that here's the golf course over at the other side, on the side of the mansion. I don't know if perhaps the parking that you propose to do could be divided in two. We were talking about this with Cabrini recently. Some could be over by the mansion. Possibly another strategy would be a garage, a two-story garage maybe. I know that's a higher cost, but that would certainly solve some of your setback issues, I think.
And I think we already made the comment with the auxiliary gym to move that as close as possible to the, I'll call it the circular driveway. That would be the other comment. Doug?
Oh, I think overall you did a very nice job here. I do like the fact that you keep the open space on Godfrey Road, and the way you laid it does sort of make sense. So, again, maybe the gym a little further away from the property line, but I think it's a good thing overall.
So?
I appreciate Steve's comments about the maintenance shed, and I think you make great points. I guess I would say, just out of deference to those 3 or 4 neighbors back there, I don't see any indication of buffering, and I don't know what exists there currently, but if you were going to leave it there, given that it's maintenance, I'm assuming maintenance trucks of some sort, be very generous.
Our maintenance guys, they're maintenance guys here. Do you want to speak to what you're...
Be very generous on the buffering, because that's been a previously open, just wooded area. Oh, okay, it's not big stuff. And I do know that neighbors on Larchwood, actually even across the street from down the road from the Acuffs, who have been impacted along the way by lights in the current parking lots. So I think there's probably some work to be done on the buffering that exists and maintenance of the buffering. And how the lights are aimed, and I don't know if there's there's pretty courtyard creations of parking lots sometimes that can a pretty courtyard wall can completely block lights of cars, and maybe that's something to consider in some areas there that are right in some neighbors' backyards. I want to see the gymnasium moved away. It's a beautiful. It's beautiful to me the way it is now. So it's, I struggle a little bit with seeing changes to it because the drive is particularly very pretty with the trees that are there now. Definitely, if you're saying that you're not going to put lights and that's not your intention, I'd want to see that as a commitment. I don't think neighbors should have to worry that 5 years down the road the track field's going to have lights, and there will be an economic pressure to want to do that at some point, particularly if you decide to put in a turf field. They kind of scream for it. And I'll be looking for the parking calculations of what's proposed, what's in use now, and how to make this work, and the traffic flow of Godfrey, only because, any of us who travel up Godfrey know what it really is like there at, from about 7:25 till about 10 after 8, and from about 2:45 to 3:30 or thereabouts. You have to work with PennDOT, and there might be some ways to fix that. So, yeah, those are my comments.
Ken?
I think you'll do yourself some favors with this moving this auxiliary gym south on the campus. I actually think it makes more sense to work off that existing turnaround that's there for that function and put it closer in the core of the campus. It'll also save you some grief with the variances being requested. And then the other piece on that maintenance shed, what's the elevation proposed for that? It looks like it's pretty significantly jacked up with the retaining walls behind it. Is that what that is?
Actually, it sort of levels out, right?
Microphone, sir.
What am I showing behind it?
Can't win.
What are the lines behind?
The lines there are grading lines. The ground falls off from, let's say, the back of what's labeled here as the Religion Center, falling down northbound direction. So with the building being flat, there are 1-foot contour lines showing that the grading around there is, the back of the building is roughly 4 feet or so above the existing grade, so that the grading down there is just tying the ground into existing grade.
So it's actually dropped.
The ground drops off, but the building is level, so as the ground drops off, the new ground behind it will drop down to meet the existing grade.
I mean, that, just to that point, that I think is going to just enhance any concerns that the neighbors have if it's sitting there kind of propped up back there. So that might be something to think through. Just, is there a way to, like you're doing with the track, either somehow shield that a little better or drop it down or something like that? But otherwise, I think I don't know Godfrey as well in those hours, and just what that access road does. If it can be controlled and it can be policed with making that entrance only, it might alleviate some pressure up here at the corner. But I mean, I don't know it as well as you do. I don't live there every day, so that's all my comments.
Regina?
Yeah, the same with the maintenance building. If the neighbors have no issue with it, the location makes sense for your function, as long as you can make it work for their views and everything else. And possibly with the parking, it seems like you have 30 extra spaces maybe, and when you reconfigure it and you move the gym, if you lose a few of those spaces to keep it further away from the neighbors, just work that into your calculations if you have a few to spare and you could somehow bring it away from that property line. And the same with the configuration of the fields. It's tight. I don't see how else you can fit the 4 fields in there, but I'm sure you've looked at it. If you look at it again, I don't know if you'll see something that can just move it away. I think coming along Sproul Road, you really won't see as much of an impact as the neighbors on Larchwood Lane are going to see, and that doesn't seem to make sense if there's any other way to do it.
Okay, thank you very much. No, not on the sketch, right? No action required, correct, David? Right. And we'll go to our last item on the agenda tonight was a recommendation of the Board of Commissioners, reference proposed ordinance amending the Radnor Township zoning ordinance by providing for regulations permitting uses not adequately or defined or permitted by Radnor Township by conditional use. Sorry about that. It's getting late. We have some language changes here in front of us. Everybody should have that copy in green and red. Who's going to walk us through this? Kevin?
Before we get into that, can I ask a quick question about the letter from Delaware County?
Sure.
It seems to me by adding or similar to, we're kind of defeating the purpose of the whole substantially different. I don't understand that, how that makes sense.
We would agree from that standpoint, the county. I mean, the intent was to have, if it was similar to, then I would put it under one of the current uses and applied by that standard. It's for those uses that are significantly different than what we currently zone for. The applicant would have 2 choices: come in under this or submit an amendment and go through that process.
So how do we handle that comment? Do we reply back to that? Do we just...
We ignore it. It's a recommendation. I mean, it doesn't make sense to me when I read it, like why, but it's their comment, so unless you want to include it in your recommendation, Kevin and I have talked about it, I would just thank you for your comment. But
Okay. As long as we don't have to incorporate that, I'm fine.
Right.
What you have in front of you, I believe you have a color map of the map that's up on the screen. Wanted to prepare that for you so you had some sort of physical references to the different areas of the township that we're talking about for the different use classifications. This ordinance was in front of you last month where you had some conversation regarding the intent of what the ordinance was, and there were some recommendations that you had made. So what we provided you is what was in your packet, which was the clean version. I thought it would be helpful to provide you with the marked up version showing you the changes that had occurred since the last meeting.
I don't have a I don't have a marked up version, do you?
It should be in green and purple.
Oh, the one that was put on the desk.
Yes.
I printed what was emailed. Okay, got it.
No, upon reviewing that today, I thought that it would be appropriate. I went through and marked it up and then
Thank
asked
you.
John to provide that, and figured it was easier and better understanding so you can see what was added. Primarily, the changes were through the body of the ordinance. We removed dwelling types for use and just talked about use, because we're talking about all uses. And then where really the thrust of the comments were coming from is under subsection C, where we talked about residential uses in R6 and PA. Its residential uses shall be permitted. So if it's determined that it's a residential use, it's only permitted in the R6 or the PA districts. And to relate that to the map, that's all of the parcels that are shown in yellow on the map. So I can, if you look at the screen, and you can kind of see the cursor, there's a section of PA and R6 in this area. PA, section of PA up in the northwestern portion of the township. There's some PA, and then again down in the southeast corner, there's some PA tracks down in there. Institutional uses shall only be allowed in the PI district, and those are shown in the blue cyan color that's up there, and they're kind of scattered throughout the township in different areas. Office, commercial, consumer service uses shall only be in the PB district, provided that the site has frontage on Lancaster Avenue. There's, I think it's a total of 6 parcels that would be applicable to. Right in the middle, St. David's Square in the area right across the street where the Radnor Hotel is at. And then further up Lancaster Avenue, in and around where the Strathmore Inn is that we discussed tonight, right in that vicinity, right the next block up from that on Lancaster Avenue. So those would be the parcels that those uses, if a use came in, would be classified where those would be at. And then industrial uses would be in the PB and the PLO. So again, those red, and then the red and purple, and then the purple colored parcels. Those where industrial uses would go. And I think that was really the main concern, is clarifying that language so that it was not residential uses in those, but only permitted, or any of those uses, depending on how they're classified, would be located in those districts.
Questions for Kevin?
I don't have a question for Kevin, because Kevin and I had a really long conversation about a week and a half ago about
66 minutes, but I wasn't tracking time.
Yes, you were, because it was long. When you look at this map, and the color map really, I think, illustrates this about as well as anything. The single largest district on this map that is impacted by this use is planned institutional. The most aggressive plans that we see in the township are at planned institution. We made a specific provision in this use regulation that if a business, if an industrial use or a commercial use comes in, that they can be in the planned business district, provided that they have frontage along Lancaster Avenue. So that severely restricts potential uses that we can't conceive of today. But the largest zoning district, planned institutional, we've placed no restriction on. And my concern, and where I went round and round and round with Kevin, is this. If a new use that we can't conceive of today, which is the whole point of this ordinance, if an institution comes forth with a new use, that because we can't conceive of it today, and it doesn't exist, and it falls under this category, they could make a zoning argument that because it's a new use, not otherwise specified, that they will revert to the parking requirements of 280-103, I gotta look for the letter, B20, which says 1 space per 1,000 square feet of floor area. That is way too liberal for something, a use that we can't think of today, that might be very, very intense, but only has to provide one parking spot per 1,000 square feet. You know, we have motor vehicle and garages have to have two spaces for each 200 square feet. Private kindergartens have to do one space per attendant plus one space per 500 square feet. Funeral homes, one space for each 60 square feet of floor area available. But a PI use that we can't conceive of today only has to provide one per 1,000 square feet. And I just feel, I heard what Colleen said, and I think that this ordinance has a very good, provides a very good protection, except for that one area. And Kevin and I went around and around because he feels very strongly. Well, I mean, I'll let him say it. He'll clarify this. He feels very strongly that a use that we can't conceive of yet, he would be able to allocate one of the current PI uses that have more stringent parking. And I say that because we can't conceive of what the use might be, if the applicant doesn't like Kevin's opinion, they could fight it at the zoning hearing board, and it could be ruled in their favor, and then the parking is back to one space per 1,000 square feet. So I've struggled with trying to think of how can we protect the township, because when you look at this map, it's covered with blue. That's the single biggest area that could use this ordinance to bring in a new use. How is there a way for us to protect ourselves and have better parking? Because the ordinance very clearly spells out that you have to meet all the density, area, and dimensional and other requirements, but it doesn't specify anything. It doesn't specify enough about parking.
Kevin, I kind of agree with your assessment that you should be able to pigeonhole this use somewhere in one of the other districts, but what's the objection to just making it, one per 500 square feet?
Well, I think that there's two issues. First, that this ordinance is dealing with a use and not the minutia of the individual sub-uses, I'll say. So let's take plans institutional, for example. And we'll take the Villanova proposal, for example. They want to come in, they're calling it a new use. Well, if they were to come in under this ordinance, I'd say, no, you're an institutional use and you're subject to all the requirements of the institutional. And the dormitory aspect of it would be subject to the dormitory component. The assembly area would be subject to the assembly parking requirements. So I think this use is dealing with uses that are not defined and isn't intended to get into the specifics of the parking. And I think that our parking regulations are defined enough, and the way we calculate parking is on a very conservative basis for institutionals, for example, that there would be a component to an institutional use that is either going to be assembly, it's going to be classroom space, or it's going to be an auditorium, it's going to have a fitness center, or it's going to have a retail component. All of those uses are categorized as sub-uses under our parking standards. I do agree with Susan that the section 20 in our parking, 1 per 1,000 for all other uses, is extremely lax in the amount of parking that it would require. That's a separate use and something that we probably should consider amending just for the good of the ordinance. But that does not necessarily impact this ordinance, what's in front of you. And that, can I say what use could come in? No, but from an institutional standpoint, institutional are generally going to be those that are serving school, it could be a library, it could be a hospital. All of those uses are, the broad base of those uses are called covered. If somebody wants to call it something else, we tell them, no, this is what you are. That can happen with anything. Anybody can challenge anything that the zoning officer determines, and then they can argue it in front of the zoning hearing board. At that point, it's anybody's guess as to what the decision would that would be. Any decision I make, and it can be spelled out very clearly in the code, they can argue it and disagree, and that's just the process within Pennsylvania. But I do agree that section 1 per 1,000 for uses that are not specifically listed should be changed. Something 1 per 500, 1 per 400, something in that nature. That's a very broad-based parking requirement that needs to be modified, but that's not what the intent of what's in front of you is dealing with uses. So we don't get, for example, the bed and breakfast. where we did not specifically have that listed. But even that, under that component, you could have a residential component of that, which we had parking requirements that could have applied.
But then remember, we also had to fine-tune our parking specifically for bed and breakfast.
We did, but we didn't. We would not have had to. If we would have had this clause in the code and the bed and breakfast came in, I could have looked to our restaurant use and I could have looked to our dwelling and dormitory use to determine a parking requirement that would have held up, because are the individual sub-uses to a much broader use. So I think our parking regulations are fine and don't impact the ordinance that's in front of you, although I do agree with Susan that 1 per thousand noted in some section 20 of the parking regs is something that probably should be changed.
So that's where Kevin and I went back and forth, is the way to address my concern, the weakness that I think exists here. Is it best to address it by amending 28103, the 1 per thousand? But I think that because we're working on institution, and I think that's going to be a longer process, that might be the best way to address it. But is there something that we could add to planned institution, just like we made the distinction that you can develop in planned business, but only if it has frontage along Lancaster Avenue? That offered a protection within this ordinance about that particular type of district. And I've struggled to think, is there a distinction that we could add to PI that would provide some measure of protection? And I don't know what it is, and maybe the reason I can't come up with it is that the parking regulation is the best protection, but it could take years to deal with the parking regulation. So that was where he and I went back and forth about. That's my only issue with the changes that we've made to this ordinance.
One of the other, I guess, advantages to the PI district and the number of parcels, those are generally in institutional hands. So they're large universities, schools, private. They're not likely, they're less likely to change hands in ownership than a private commercial business, considering the cost and the size of some of these parcels. So that actually, while it works in one direction, that there's a lot of it and can apply to multiple parcels, it also really kind of narrows down what can happen with those because of the ownership of those parcels. And it's more likely that somebody can approach a private landowner to sell a half-acre lot along Lancaster Avenue than it would be to sell, 30 or 40 acres on Villanova's campus or Agnes Irwin's, something along that line. That method of transferring ownership is much more difficult when you're getting into those institutional types of uses.
Yes, Susan, I'm less, I guess I kind of would side a little bit with Kevin. I mean, I'm less fearful of some unintended consequence, somebody slipping through the net we've, set up here. Because I think he can, put the uses, apply them to the code. And then I think we just have to, put that 1 per thousand on the parking, let's put that on the list of things we need to modify, just good practice just to get that done in general, unrelated to this.
Well, and if that's what comes from this, is that as I said, when he and I went back and he got me to understand that it is really about the use of parking, then yay, then let's deal with that, because it's probably the single biggest number of applicants I've seen in the last couple of years, and it's always the one with the most impact, and it's everywhere in the township.
What would be to prevent us from adding something to institutional uses being allowed in the PI district, and parking provided will not, put a minimum of parking provided for the, can we add like a little caveat?
The way we currently calculate parking for a school, there's multiple components of it. You'll have the educational area, you'll have an assembly area, you may have a retail area for bookstores and things like that. We take each of those little subcomponents and then apply the standards to it as it would exist of its own individual use, and we take the cumulative of that, and then that's the required parking. To then focus in under our broad base ordinance to put a parking standard to that, you may not be capturing and providing enough parking. So
Well, I'm not saying to replace the definitions of parking, but to say at a minimum, rather than the existing minimum, which is for the other uses, what have you. Just redefine it there to be more stringent than what's already in our code until we can get that changed. If you felt it was 500 square feet or whatever it was, that at no time it would be less than that.
Can I make a suggestion? Because, Susan, your concern is 280-103, that subparagraph 20, sort of a catch-all parking requirement? Right. Okay.
Yes.
I think that, it's easy enough to add, another section to this existing ordinance. It's easy enough to do that. There's a reason why this is being advertised, and it can be re-advertised again. And we can add that to it. The ordinance as it is now, under D, it says, once the requested use has been provided through the allowance of this use in a designated district by the zoning officer, such use shall meet the density, area, dimensional, and other requirements of that district. So I'm paging through the ordinance. The districts itself don't contain parking criteria. It's bumped. Some ordinances do, but this ordinance doesn't by district. It bumps it all to to 103, and it's by use. So, what I would suggest we do is just add an amendment to 103-20 and come up with some number that covers any potential use, whether it's institutional or otherwise. I don't think it's just an institutional use issue, but some number that Kevin's comfortable with, because you're still going to have a conditional use proceeding here. So we can put a number that would capture the worst case scenario, and that could be modified during a conditional use proceeding if it's excessive, because there are situations where you have way more parking than you actually need for a particular use. But that picks up other uses that Kevin's going to, if he would get an application, not just institutional, but it would provide a parking standard for all these other uses that aren't adequately defined. And I think that closes a potential, and I'm not concerned that this would happen with institutional, but I could see it maybe with some other uses. So we would just amend this, add a 280-103-20, a new section 2 would probably plug it in there, amending that section.
To do that, we are going to need to re-advertise.
I know.
September.
Yeah, which is fine. We're going to have to re-advertise what we have, and we may have to send it back to the Delaware County Planning Commission. And I know you all want to see it again when it comes back, because anytime you make a little change in an ordinance, you have to start the clock over again, or you have the possibility of a challenge on procedural grounds. So I think that eliminates a potential cloudy area on this going forward.
What if we had a separate amendment?
It's going to involve the same. It's going to involve the same amount of advertising.
I was, in essence, asking John if we had a separate amendment that if we were to run this through its process to get this ordinance in place, then there would, in essence, this would be introduced at the July Commissioners meeting, and then, in theory, voted on at the August meeting. If we go through that process again, this would be at the best introduced at the August meeting and then voted upon at the September meeting. So you end up losing a month or so time where this ordinance wouldn't be enacted. But you could take this one through and then run a separate amendment for just the parking, to amend that separately. Or we can do it all as one.
I think at this point, I don't think there's a rush to adopt this because it's been advertised twice. So not adopting it in July or adding something to it doesn't do any harm. As long as it's been advertised and there's an intent to enact this, then there's not an issue going forward. So I would just as soon add that, because as it sits right now, it doesn't really address parking for any of these districts. If it's a use, it's not listed in the general parking standards. And
John, that was actually always true for me, but why I kept mentioning PI is that the largest areas throughout the township abutting the most number of residential districts was PI. But you're right, it doesn't address that
Right.
use we can't think of in all
But-
these districts.
But if you look at the PI uses, they're all covered. I can't think of any other institutional use that isn't covered by the language of the existing ordinance. So there's in my view, very little risk. There's no other it includes convalescent homes, it includes it includes all kinds of stuff, and then it also says, or other similar uses. So you're not going to get a new version of any of those uses where this is going to come into play. But I think we still need to address the parking criteria for any potential new use.
But this ordinance is acknowledging, this is the reason we're doing this ordinance, is that we are acknowledging that there are uses out there that could come up that we haven't even conceived in the realm of possibility, and we're trying to provide protection for it. And I would just say, PI could come up with something that I can't think of. There are much brighter people out there than I, and they will think of something someday that we haven't considered. And that's why we have this ordinance, is to protect us. So let's take that step and protect us all the way. That's my point.
So
Interesting.
are you saying that you'd like to modify Part D and then add something after you're saying meet the density, area, dimensional, and other? You want to
Parking.
You want to add parking in
Yeah,
there?
there's got to be a parking, because your parking criteria is not in the district regulations. It's kicked to the back of the ordinance, and it's by use.
So would you say instead of that district and use?
No, it would read, shall meet the density, area, dimensional, and other requirements of that district, including parking, and somehow. we need to-
Because it's not the district that dictates the
It's the
parking,
use.
it's the use. So you
Right.
have to somehow say, and the use, the parking required by the use.
We would probably put in there, such uses shall meet the requirements of subsection or section 103 parking. And it's interesting in that our zoning ordinance had provided for these undetermined uses for parking, but not anywhere in the
Right.
code.
Right.
So we had covered ourselves from a parking standpoint, but not from the use standpoint. So we're taking care of the loophole from the use, and while we're at it, we'll adjust the
Because
really
no districts have
inappropriate-
parking requirements.
Yeah,
So
it
there's no
wouldn't-
parking
You're not
requirements.
defining it. It doesn't mean that they wouldn't have parking requirements, it just isn't as tight as you'd like it to be.
Correct.
Right. D would add the word parking, and then there would have to be a new section tying it into 10320. We're going to have to change that. So they're the two changes I think would clean this up and finalize this. Like I said, there's no overriding reason to do this month. It could be.
Well, couldn't we make a recommendation with those changes and then send it off to the Board of Commissioners rather than have to come back in front of us?
Well, it's going to go to the Board of Commissioners.
No, but I'm saying rather than you make the changes and bring it back to us again, can we not recommend accepting it with those
Yes.
modifications?
Yes.
Because I think that makes more sense. They're so minor.
Yes, that's what happened last time. But, bear with me, even when you make little changes, and you make the changes, and we do them, there's some court cases that say you have to look at the changes that you,
Well, the thing I'm thinking is it's going to get in front of the Board of Commissioners and they may also make changes.
I don't anticipate that
No?
that's going to happen. I think that
Okay.
as far as this is, with these,
They're not going to look at those kind of details? Okay.
So we should.
So you're going to make the comments and bring it back here then?
no, I think you will get it back here, because procedurally, I think we have to, and I want to make sure that there's no
Okay.
potential. But remember that that'll be your third.
But can we do those
Or
simultaneously? Can we send it off with those recommendations and see it? Okay, so that we're not going to hold off on
No.
giving that to them.
No, my suggestion tonight is, if you're happy with those revisions, move it on to the Board of Commissioners. It's going to be on their agenda on the 16th.
Okay.
They won't adopt it on the 16th, but they're going to look at it, and then we're going to have to re-advertise it at the next available meeting. And between now and when it comes back to the commissioners, you'll have a meeting first week of August. You can take a quick look at it, and then the board will adopt it.
Do we need a motion? John, do we need a motion for that, or is it just administrative at this point?
I think a motion to recommend that this existing ordinance be amended to address the concerns about parking in all the districts for any undefined users.
I will make that motion.
Thank you. I have a motion. May I have a second?
Second.
I have a second from Skip. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Old business.
Very quickly.
Very
Oh,
quickly.
do you have one?
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Very quickly, speaking of ordinances that I wonder whatever happened to them, when I first came on the board 2.5 years ago, we worked on the wireless cell tower facility communications. Skip and I, it was our first meeting or two. I don't think it ever went to the Board of Commissioners, and just wondering what the status of that is, because it called for a lowered height to cell phone towers within the township. It was right after the FCC had brought out regulations, and we were trying to tighten it up, and it never went to BOC. Skip and I remember that, because it was the first thing we worked on.
Yeah. There was something, another thing was residential solar, installations.
Yeah, that's right. We did that
That's
too.
another one. And there's still a third one, which I can't remember now.
Yep. But those two, but the wireless thing came to mind because of that application at the firehouse. It came to mind for me. Just curious what the status of that is, if people want to look into it.
Carry. The other item is, I guess we were trying, Kevin, to schedule a meeting.
Yeah, I think what we should do, because there's a lot of emails floating back and forth and then trying to get a consensus as to when a good time to meet, and I think we need to set up a regular time, and unfortunately Jim Doling isn't here for me to get an actual confirmation, but just quickly looking through the calendar, it seems like the second and fourth Mondays are generally open, at least from what I can foresee. There's nothing scheduled now on the calendar for the rest of the year. I think December that we may run into a fourth Tuesday with Christmas. But beyond that, it seemed like we were pretty open, missing Thanksgiving, which is following on the third week of the year, not the fourth. So in order to get this going and meet on a regular basis for your schedules and then for the consultants to set up a consistent day of the month on a week that works best for your schedule. So evening. Tuesdays. I apologize. If I said
Tuesdays.
Monday,
You
second
said Mondays,
fourth
and I thought,
Tuesdays,
isn't that the night of the
yes.
Board of Commissioners meetings? But whatever.
No, I'm not bumping the commissioners'
Yeah.
meetings. No.
We were listening.
And that includes this month of July?
Well, I think that there was some concern with this month since the one, we weren't getting consensus. Even the 12th, which had the majority, only had 5 or 6 people, which there was a good portion that then weren't able to attend.
Okay.
And we can still advertise. I needed to have advertised for, to get it in this week's paper for today, which we clearly missed.
Too late. So we'll look at August for the second and fourth Tuesdays, and let's email
Well,
her.
for the rest of the year, and then, as part of the reorg, we can set forth, and if that seems to work for everybody to get into your schedule, we can carry that through for the remainder of the project.
Okay.
We just need some feedback so then I can let the consultant know. The sooner we let him know, he can schedule his time.
All right, great. Any other old business? Any new business? Any public comment? With no public comment, meeting is adjourned. Have a nice holiday, and we'll see you next month.